Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
I'm not sure if he knows how little respect I have for him. He leans back in his chair, slowly placing his hands behind his head, making a meal of it, as though what is to follow is going to bring him great pleasure. The two rings under his armpits are bigger versions of the circles that surround his sallow eyes. Other patches of darkness decorate the rest of his pallid and pudgy face, as though his soul is seeping through his skin. Tony. He exhales slowly, as though he is about to deliver the news that my mother has passed. Center stage on his desk is a picture of his wife and kids at the beach. I wonder why they're smiling. At this moment in time, I want to know that more than anything else in the world. The whiteboard above his head lists his duties for the day. He could wipe that clean and scrawl the words, "Be a prick," across it. He's staring at me now with a look that suggests pity and disappointment. I bet he's rehearsed this in the mirror. "You haven't hit targets in months, Tony," he finally breathes out. Was that a smile? It isn't a question, but he leaves it hanging in the air regardless. I consider my response. I could handle this with decorum. "Jeff, you're a dick." Nobody has stood up to him before, but I've had enough. As the words land, there's a sharp intake of breath and a noticeable tightening of his face. His right eyelid collapses, stuck in a long, drawn-out wink. He finally raises his left hand, physically drawing his eyelid back with his finger. It's quite a spectacle. "You're a waste of skin, Jeff. Everyone despises you. Wishes you were dead. The number of times I've sat at my desk squeezing that stress ball, pretending it's your fat neck." Anything else would be overkill, so I pause, giving him the chance to absorb my words. So much for going with grace. But this is bottled fury. I'm well out of my comfort zone, hands shaking with adrenaline. They still quiver even as I clasp them together. He slowly brings his arms back down, and a nervous cough escapes the pursed hole between the downturn of his lips. He crosses his legs, and his pants ride up, unveiling colorful Garfield socks, a futile effort to portray himself as one of us. His right eye begins to twitch more aggressively as he opens his mouth to speak. Nothing emerges. He looks at me and snaps his head quickly to the ground, before placing his finger behind his drab gray tie, wrestling it forward to relieve some of the pressure from the ripples in his neck. I know nothing about this man, yet I despise him. He came into my life and turned it upside down. Things were fine. Plenty of commission and talk of promotion as the company continued to expand. I was top dog. And then, the stroke of genius of employing Jeff to manage the expanding sales team, a man devoid of personality and with no respect for the staff he commands. Multiple times I've daydreamed about lodging a pen into his brain. "I was the best salesperson 5 years in a row. You've been in this middle management role for 6 months. And in that time, you've stripped all the good accounts away from seasoned players, handing them off to incompetent juniors. What is that? Envy? The only other explanation is that you are plain and simple dumb as dog shit." I'm on a roll here. Jeff begins to squirm in his seat. The tailored suit, likely purchased in slimmer times, begins to look even smaller on, as though it's constricting with his ego. "Tony, with all due respect, shut the fuck up, Jeff." I'm going down fighting. The guy has made the lives of the entire sales floor miserable of late, cancelling all holidays, getting us in early, keeping us until late with endless meetings of drivel, and all to try and make up for the mess he's made of things. We're all paying the price for his inadequacy. The hair matted to his head that is too perfectly black starts to drip a viscous liquid, that slowly rolls down his forehead onto the bridge of his nose. There's something strange going on with his eyes also. The dark surrounding rings seem to be growing, drawing his eyes inward. He doesn't look well at all. But there is no going back now. Where did you learn to be such an arsehole? Is there a special school that allows you to specialize in being a turd? With a violently shaking hand, he reaches for the coffee cup on the table. But before he can grab it, I swipe it away, sending it smashing into the mustard-colored wall. Momentarily, I imagine it's his skull, pretending the dark streaks of splatter are his blood. Through the blinds, I see others turn in surprise. The faint murmur of gossip begins. I'm on another level now. He's made my life hell. Nothing ever good enough. I haven't slept well for weeks. The late nights, the ban on vacation days, insistence on coming in at the weekends, the relentless texts and emails. Judy and I have done nothing but argue. Even the kids have suffered at the mercy of this fat fuck. No more! I stand up, sending the chair falling behind me. Instinctively, I reach across, grabbing his tie, heaving him away from the protection of the desk. The office shudders as I throw him against the wall. I'm only inches away from his face now. I can taste the fat on his breath, but there's something fouler that permeates the air between us. A cocktail of cheap aftershave and rotting flesh. As I stare into his lifeless eyes, the dark liquid continues to run down the side of his face. He opens his mouth and utters sheepishly, I need your forecast, Tony. The laughter comes immediately. I can't control it. The whole situation is absurd. And my sales projection request is the icing on the cake. Jeff, what the hell is wrong with you? The twitch in his eyes getting worse. He's winking at me with unfathomable speed. He reaches for his throat as if he is struggling to get enough breath, and I'm immediately drawn to the ring on his wedding finger. Encrusted in the middle is a large red jewel, perhaps a ruby. It begins to glow. Forecast! The damp patches are springing up everywhere, including a large one quickly spreading on the crotch of his pants. Random blotches of black liquid are popping up across his shirt, as though each of my words is puncturing his skin. Is that gasoline I can smell? I feel out of depth, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling, and an involuntary shudder rattling down my spine. His shirt is saturated now. Dark rings continue to consume the entirety of his face. Streams of black work their way down his face like wax down a candle, and I can feel their heat as they gently fizz on his cheek. Slowly, he begins to slip down the side of the wall. He said it would be easy, he croaks. Veins in his bulbous neck are turning to a fiery orange in front of my eyes, and there's a sizzling sound accompanied by small wisps of grey smoke. My heart pounds wildly, and my throat suddenly feels so dry. I was in control, but this is throwing me. My knees feel weak. My stomach is churning. He clutches at the ring, trying to rip it from his finger, but it doesn't budge. No! I don't want to go back! He screams. There's a sudden and horrific crack as his nose twists out of shape. A black, treacle-like liquid oozing from the wound. It drips onto the carpet and begins to smolder. As he reaches for his face, more bleeding lacerations break out across his cheeks. His hair is no longer jet black, but a mousy grey, and it's starting to frazzle and fall out. The number 666 appears to have been branded across the flesh of his scalp. Some of my colleagues are at the window peering through the blinds. Jake looks to me as if I might be able to offer an explanation, but I shrug, turning my attention back to the smoking man. All I can do is watch, stunned, frozen to the spot as his body continues to smoke in front of me. I wonder how anything so damp can burn. But then I remember the pungent smell of petrol. He begins to moan, violently kicking his legs and writhing on the floor in a series of spasms. Smoke emanates from all parts, and his shirt and pants are disintegrating into ashes, floating surreally towards the dirty fluorescent lights in the ceiling. With a gentle whoosh, he erupts into a ball of flames. The liquid that was oozing from his body only seems to fuel the fire, and all I can do is watch as the fire begins to consume him. The scream that emanates is unworldly. Thousands of blood-curdling howls rolled into one, and I shiver involuntarily and contrarily to the heat he is emitting. Our eyes lock, but I can still make out the intermittent flash of the red jewel on his finger. His skin peels away, and the smell of cooking flesh permeates the air. I double over and dry heave, but I can't take my eyes away from the unfolding carnage. The whites of his eyes are still prominent through the flames, standing out against the veiled shades of red and black. A gentle popping sound occurs, and one of them begins to ooze down the side of his cheek, like a freshly cracked egg. It bubbles and jars, blending in quickly with the slab of now lifeless meat that was once my boss. I hear urgent voices and footsteps outside. The door swings open, and I see Kate, face as white as a sheet, holding out her fire extinguisher. "It's a little late for that," I mutter. We both watch as the body impossibly disintegrates into nothing but a small pile of ashes. More of my colleagues start to gather around the charred carpet tiles, and all that remains of our boss. After a lengthy stalemate of confusion and shock, Jake finally utters, "Should I get the vacuum?" I bend down to explore the neat pile of ashes on the floor, and it isn't long before I find it. I lift the ring, rotating it in my fingers, to find an inscription written on the inside. "Congratulations on graduating from our middle management school, Jeff. Now get out there and bring hell to their day. Yours, Lucifer." I've since followed the press coverage. There are people on the other side of the world claiming they recognize the person that I saw turn to ash. But this man didn't go by the name of Jeff. John tried to kill his wife and 2 children, poured gasoline all over the carpets and curtains before tossing the match, and then getting into his car and driving head-on into a tree. They lived, but he died of massive head trauma. Where else would such a failure end up but middle management? The picture of the family on his desk was cut out from a magazine we later found in one of his drawers. These souls that walk the office floor, bringing gloom, despair, endless meetings, and circles of sweat, are here to make our lives hell. They're the devil's minions, hiding under the guise of middle management. And they've all walked this earth before, but on the wrong path. They've been recruited and sent back to do his work. They're not one of us, and they must be stopped.
The first rays of sun peeked over the top of the trees before I reached the front door. I peered back over my shoulder, squinting against the light as I fumbled to shake the house key loose from the others and slide it into the lock. But time was against me. In fact, I only just managed to push the door closed before daylight overtook me entirely. Confounded 12-hour shifts, I sighed and leaned back against the door to give my eyes time to adjust to the relative darkness. I'd been the surgeon on call after hours for years, but ever since COVID hit, it had become more of a permanent assignment than simply filling in the gaps. In fact, I'd been on night shift for so long now, I'd almost forgotten what the sun looked like. Once I could see again, I dropped my keys on the table, almost at the same time Dorian, my taskmaster, greeted me with a rub against my shin and cursed me with an angry mew. Placing my briefcase and bag of groceries beside my keys, I turned to Dorian. Yes, I know you're hungry, little miss." She sat down on the floor at my feet, staring up at me with her emerald green eyes, judging me as only a black cat can. It couldn't be helped, madam. I had to stop by the market on the way home. The surgeon taking up the morning shift today was late as usual. Dorian cut me off with a meow and glanced from me to the kitchen. Very well, slave driver. I groaned and headed for the pantry. You are quite right, of course. Excuses don't fill empty bellies, do they? Passing the cupboard, I paused to retrieve a wine glass and set it on the table, earning myself yet another chastisement from my mistress. Now, Dorian, you have your needs and I have mine. Or perhaps you would like a turn at being supper. Dorian's eyes narrowed, but being a cat, reacted only to the tone of my voice. Patience, my pet, I cooed in as soothing a voice as I could manage, but even to my ears it sounded cold and emotionless. To be expected, I supposed. It had been a long, frustrating day, and I simply didn't have it in me to pretend anymore. Everything in its time, and this, dear Dorian, is a time to celebrate. I opened the fridge and selected my finest red, a vintage I laid down years ago. I popped the cork and passed the bottle beneath my nose, filling my senses with its wild, passionate bouquet. Ah, Esmeralda, I groaned as her memory came rushing back. You remember her, don't you? The girl with the red hair, the one from Paris, the dancer? I truly did love her, you know. I glanced over at Dorian, watching me with utter disdain from the pantry door, completely unmoved by my profession of love. Philistine, madam, that's what you are, a complete barbarian, I told her, but shook the memory from my mind regardless. Though you are quite right, there's no use living in the past. I tipped the wine to my glass, filled it to the brim, and put the bottle back in the refrigerator. Tonight we drink to the future. But I was often struck by my companion's wisdom, enough to wonder sometimes if I wouldn't have been better foregoing my pursuit of love entirely and find contentment with Dorian alone. Fearing another outburst from my mistress, I opened the pantry and selected an elegant blend of fish and chicken niblets for my companion, before taking my glass in hand and making for my favorite chair. I do go on, but in fact, cats are magnificent creatures, a trifle judgmental perhaps, but proud and loving in their own limited, self-serving way. I had only just settled down in my armchair by the fireplace and begun to ponder how similar Dorian and I truly were when my phone vibrated, chasing me from my reverie. I fished my phone out of the front pocket of my pants just in time to see Dr. Wallace's name and number fade from the screen. So you did find your ID then, I snorted. He should have. I left it where even he could hardly miss it, but I supposed it wasn't his fault. Time is so unforgiving to mortals, and the old boy was getting on in years. In fact, now that I thought about it, we were to celebrate his 64th birthday next week, which reminded me, I too had reason to celebrate. Clara Dane, I said to no one in particular, and swiped a thumb over the screen, bringing it back to life. Dorian hopped on my lap, still licking the last of her supper from her lips as I brought up Clara's Tinder bio. I tipped the phone to show her who I'd selected. What do you think? Do we have a feature? Dorian, for her part, raised her tail, turned 3 tight circles, and lied down in my lap, completely unimpressed. I smiled and lowered my wine glass to stroke her fur with my pinky. In truth, Clara was everything I was looking for. Young, vibrant, with kind, loving eyes. If I knew nothing more about her, it would have been enough. But her bio, the way she described herself, not the words themselves, mind you, the ache behind them, the emotion, the need she felt to pour out her love on someone, to help them. I scratched Dorian under the chin. She stretched out her neck and purred with delight. Quite right, madam. I took a sip from my glass, set it on the table beside my chair, and typed a message to Clara. She's perfect. It's always been fascinating to me, the little awkward dance we do, the moves and counter moves, rather like chess in a way. A ritual made all the more complicated by the trappings of the modern world, and yet at the same time, so very much as it has always been. First encounters being of the utmost importance, and while Clara and I had spoken many times via text and phone over the past weeks, such distant relations cannot compare to meeting someone in person. Everything had to be perfect. For tonight, I selected a venue specifically suited to occasion. Public. After all, this was our first meeting, and as Clara favored Italian cuisine, I thought Gib Alto's would do nicely. A fine establishment, but not so extravagant as to seem pretentious, and popular enough to ensure we would not be alone. As per tradition, I arrived early to make certain our reservations did not pass to another and spoil the evening. But time began to linger. A woman's laugh by the door drew my attention, but it wasn't her. I checked my watch. 20 minutes late. Not to worry. I knew she was coming. If I had learned anything about Clara from our text conversations, it was that she put others' needs before her own. That she was late was actually fortuitous. In her mind, the way she thought, the way she was, it would put her in the offender's seat, the position of guilt, making her more amiable and far more forgiving of my own social failings. No, tonight looked to be a great success. As I pondered, the waiter arrived and cleared his throat. Would the sir like something to drink while he waits for his partner? But of course. I glanced up at him. A glass of tonight's specialty, if you please. Yvonne Red. The waiter sniffed and raised his chin in understanding. My pleasure, sir. And a glass of champagne for my guest when she arrives. His eyes flitted to the chair and his face brightened. It only lasted a fraction of a second, but enough to set my teeth on edge. I kept an eye on him as he turned and weaved through the tables on his way to the kitchens. Foolish, really. A failing on my part, I admit, and one I have been unable to rid myself of despite all my best efforts. As a result, I tried to avoid public settings for these meetings. Too many eyes, too many distractions. Damon? A woman's voice asked. The delicate floral scent of her perfume touched me at the same time as her words, a perfect compliment to her light, quiet voice. Indeed, I answered, spinning to face her as I rose. She wore a blue high-cut dress, tight enough to flatter her figure, while at the same time accentuate her modesty. And you must be Clara. Bowing slightly, I stepped around to pull her chair back from the table. The color rose in her cheeks. Thank you. She brushed her black hair behind her ear and her gaze fell to the floor. She tried to pass it off as merely searching for the chair before she sat down, but the tremble of her fingers and slight quiver in her voice betrayed her. Sorry I'm late, she offered as I pushed her closer to the table. My roommate... I silenced her with a shake of my head. Please, let's not start our evening with regrets. Her blue eyes twinkled as I settled down in my seat across the table. You said in your message that you are a nurse at Mercy General? A noble profession, milady. Milady? She snorted and covered her mouth, trying to hide her deepening blush. For a moment I wondered if I overplayed my hand, but then she rolled her eyes and laid her hand on her lap. Not upset, merely flattered, and perhaps a trifle embarrassed by the snort in her laugh. Innocent, self-conscious, and kind. My lips tugged up at the corners. I could not have asked for a better beginning. Forgive me, I'm a man of old virtues. How would you prefer I address you, madam? Madam? she muttered under her breath and rolled her eyes again. Then, with a shake of her hair, Clara straightened her posture, and her voice took on the hint of mock sophistication. "A relic you may be, sir, but the old ways are most welcome. For this evening, milady and madam will do fine, but in the future, please do me the honor of using my given name." I lifted my water glass in tribute to the old ways, Madame Clara. She raised her glass and tapped it against my own, beaming. "May the relics of the past never die." I nodded my agreement and drank to my own longevity. The next few weeks fell into place rather neatly. She worked during the day, I at night, so we met after dark every Saturday evening. We discussed many things. Clara was as open and kind as her picture on Tinder suggested. It wasn't long before she was comfortable enough to divulge even her darkest memories, namely, that when she was a little girl, she lost her father and brother Chris in a car accident. It was a simple enough story. She was 5, her brother 4. From what I gathered, it was one of those dreary nights in late October, raining but on the edge of ice, when a stag broke cover and ran out in front of the car. Her father's reaction was to swerve instead of brake, and he lost control. Clara was thrown clear when the car rolled and forced to watch, to listen, as her loved ones burned to death, trapped in that pile of twisted metal. Oh, how she cried when she showed me the scars marring the flesh across her palms, the cuts and burns she suffered as she clawed at the wreckage, the marks that never let her forget the horror of that day. I pulled her to my chest and wound my fingers through her hair, comforting her as best I could. But there are no words that heal the past. I simply held her in my arms, stroked the back of her head, and whispered gently in her ear how sorry I was, until her sobs choked into silence, until her body stopped shaking. When her breath steadied, she whispered, "It was my fault," into my shirt. "I should have been in my seat, but Chris, he took my doll." I unbuckled and crawled over the seat to get it back. Dad saw me in the mirror. Her fingernails dug into my back. He only turned around for a second, and whatever composure she fought to maintain crumbled in that moment. I've never been good at empathy, but for her sake I tried. I imagined what it was like being there in her place. The shower of glass, the screams, shock and disorientation as the car rolled over and over. But that's all I could do. Imagine. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but it wasn't your fault. It was an accident. There is no reason to carry that guilt, Clara. Deer appear out of nowhere, and on those conditions, in the dark?" I shook my head. "Your father was only human. Even if he wasn't distracted, he would have reacted the same. Listen to me. It is not your fault." "I know that now, but try explaining that to a 5-year-old. And I know it's stupid, but it still feels like it is." She sniffed into my shirt and tipped up her head to look me in the eye. "Anyway, that's why I became a nurse, to sort of make it right, if that makes any sense." Her jaw clenched, her brow peaked, and her lips broke into a strained-looking smile. "You probably think I'm crazy." "Not at all." I pushed her away, cupped her face between my hands, and wiped a tear from her cheek with my thumb. "You turned your pain into another's blessing, tragedy into mercy. As I said before, it's a noble path you've chosen, Miss Clara, akin to the deeds of the saints of old." "Me, a saint?" She coughed out a laugh. "I told you, no miss, no anything, just Clara." "All right, then." I whispered and bent down so close I could feel the warmth of her breath on my cheeks. "Just Clara," I whispered, and before she could react, gently pressed my lips to hers. Her body went rigid, but it only took a moment for her to relax, her mouth to open to my kiss. When it had, I slid one hand around the back of her neck and slipped the other down to her lower back. She moaned softly as I stroked the little hairs behind her ear, teasing her skin into goose pimples. She was mine now, eager for more. But I already went as far as I dared. I learned long ago to stay my hand in times like these. Only a fool presses his advantage in the game of love. No. Old saying is quite true. All good things to those who wait. Time marched on as it always does. Clara and I shared many conversations, many long starlit walks with her hand in mine. And I confess, I shared more of my past with her than I had with any other woman that came before. Until at last, months later, when I just opened my final bottle of Esmeralda and realized it was indeed time to bring her home. I pushed open the door, dropped my keys on the table, and backed out of the way, offering Clara a little bow as she entered my home. Welcome to my humble abode. She dipped her chin as she stepped over the threshold, meek and curious. Her focus darted from the war hall on the right to the Zulu war mask a little farther down on her left, dissecting the remnants of my past with each flick of her eyes. Wow, she gasped, walking a little further in. So many relics. It's like being in a museum. No way. She trotted down the hall and crouched by the display case just inside my living room. I thought you were lying. Is this really his surgical set? She traced her finger along the edge of the glass, practically quivering with excitement. The actual René Laennec? I walked up beside her, unlocked the latch, and removed the scalpel from its place. The very same. I palmed the handle, my hand falling around the hilt in a familiar, practiced movement, before turning it over and offering her the chance to inspect the blade herself. It's like 10 inches long. She pulled her lower lip between her teeth and lifted the knife from my grasp. Can you even imagine what it must have been like? She breathed, taking in the length of the instrument. Doing surgery with daggers like these? That one is for amputations, I offered. Her gaze lifted from the scalpel to me, then returned to the knife in her hand. Hence the length of the blade. But in some ways, these instruments are far superior to their modern counterparts. Feel the balance, the way it comes alive in your hand, and of course it's silver, which serves as a natural counter to biological contaminants as well as killing werewolves. She laughed, cutting me off as she swiped the scalpel through the air as one might a sword. Like Van Helsing. She stepped back, grinning, and pointed the knife at my chest. Stay back, monster. I smiled and raised my arms in surrender. Careful, madam, it's still quite sharp. And besides, Van Helsing hunted vampires, not werewolves. I lowered a hand, palm up, indicating for her to return it to me. Ah, she snorted, then slapped the hilt into my palm. So, silver's useless against a vampire? Indeed. I wiped the flat of the blade against my sleeve to clear the oils of her skin from the surface, tucked the scalpel back into its place, and latched it safely back inside the case. Everyone knows killing a vampire requires driving a wooden stake through his heart. None of the legends mention silver. She bent down, still transfixed by the medical history behind the glass. I just can't believe I'm actually dating the great-great-grandson of the René Laennec. Her eyes shone when she turned her focus on me. A whole family line of first-class surgeons. And that's when Dorian entered the scene. She slunk out of the kitchen, head held high, as though the house was hers, and Clara and I were only barely welcome. Ah, yes. I catch Clara's eye and nod to Dorian. I do believe I told you that you were not the only woman in my life. This, my dear, is my companion, Dorian. Dorian, ever ruled by disdain, strode past Clara, ignoring her entirely. She sat down at my feet with a rather indignant-sounding mew and stared up at me expectantly. "Yes, madam," I sighed and squatted down beside the true mistress of the house in order to quell her wrath with a stroke of her ears and back. "I must again beg your pardon, it seems. But you see, Dorian, the blame does not rest with me entirely this time." Dorian turned her head, blinked at Clara as though she were inspecting a rather disgusting insect, and resumed pretending she didn't exist. I tapped the end of her nose with my finger. "Oh, come now, madam. You're being terribly rude." I glanced up at Clara just in time to watch her mouth twitch up at the corners. "Forgive me, Dorian," she said with a curtsy. "I had no idea we were delaying supper." Unbuttoning her purse, Clara reached into the bag and pulled out a small bit of dried cat jerky. "I hope this doesn't mean we can't be friends." Dorian, apparently won over by the tidbit, if not Clara's undeniable charm, abandoned me instantly. She trotted over to rub her leg in the most unabashed display of betrayal I'd seen in many years. "Turncoat," I muttered under my breath as I watched Dorian finish the treat and flop over on her back for a belly rub. "A regular Benedict Arnold, madam. If this was a time of war, I'd have you flogged." "Damon," Clara pouted in a childish scold. "I'm surprised at you keeping this itty-bitty kitty waiting when she's so hungry." As if the two of them had forged some mystical feminine bond in the last 20 seconds, Dorian cast me an icy stare and punctuated the gesture with, in my opinion, a completely unnecessary hiss. I clicked my tongue reproachfully and reached over to stroke her neck. "So that's how it is, eh? I bring another woman into our lives and now I'm outnumbered." Dorian caught my finger between her paws and pulled it to her mouth to chew on my knuckle. All in play, of course. I caught Clara studying my reaction from the corner of my eye and gave my finger a little shake to free my hand from the tiger's maw. "Then I yield, madam. I know when I'm bested, and I dare not risk contending with two hungry ladies." I pushed myself to my feet and offered Clara my hand. "Well, my dear, might I suggest you and Miss Dorian retire to the living room whilst I prepare supper?" Dinner, I must say, went off without a hitch. The Sangiovese harmonized beautifully with the ravioli, once I seasoned with it my own special blend of valerian and oregano. In fact, Clara actually moaned when the first bite touched her tongue. Even her eyelids fluttered. "I've never tasted anything like it. This is incredible." Her shoulders slumped as she surrendered to the sensation, so distracted she didn't notice me carefully push my own supper off my plate and into the napkin on my lap. "I'm glad you approve," I said, once I had removed enough to give the illusion that I'd eaten. "It took years to perfect the recipe, but it's really the wine that completes the alchemy." Her right eye cracked open in a slow, lazy motion, warm and deep, intoxicated. It was a look I'd seen many times, in many a woman's eye over the years. Love. The expression leaked from her eyes, down her cheeks in hues of pink, until it reached the edges of her mouth, where it pulled her lips into a soft, warm, comfortable smirk. "A great surgeon and a great chef," she sighed and reached for her glass. Never taking her eyes from mine, she lifted the wine to her nose, spun the liquid around the base to release the scent, and offered a toast. "To all the great things yet to come." It's an interesting thing how simple, how pure a brief moment can be. Such moments should never be rushed. They need to be savored, for they will never come again. I lifted my own glass, swirling the contents in the same way she had, allowing the moment to linger as I watched my own drink, Esmeralda, swirl thick and slow. But if she did notice the difference between her wine and the thick red liquid in my own glass, she paid it no heed. No, by this point she had completely fallen, blinded by love. I smiled and tapped the edge of my glass to hers. To you, madam. May we enjoy many long years together. The color in her cheeks exploded into full bloom. I watched the smile on her lips spread as she drew back her arm and attempted to hide her face behind her glass. Then she grinned at me over the rim like a naughty child, said, "May we never be parted," and took a sip. Her pupils dilated almost instantly when the sedative hit her tongue, but there was no horror in her eyes, even as consciousness left her. No shock, no hatred. The valerian, mixed with the chemicals in her wine, saw to it that the last thing she would feel was pure, unadulterated ecstasy. I watched her arm twitch twice as she fought against the drug, the glass tip and spill as it rolled from her fingers, her body slump forward and fall on the table. She mumbled something, a question I could only guess at, and then Clara fell silent. I gave Esmeralda a swirl, drank the final remnants of my last romance, and offered Clara a promise. In a way we never shall, madam. I'll remember you always. On that, you have my word. During the next few moments, I retired to the basement to make my final preparations. Once everything was ready, I hefted Clara's body on my shoulder and brought her down as well. I carefully laid her on the mortician's table I had procured specifically for her, raised the head a few inches, and gently fastened the straps around her head, arms, and legs. She moaned, struggling to awake as the effect of the drugs began to wane. I leaned over her head and watched her eyelids flutter. Those beautiful blue eyes that always looked at me with such awe, such love. For a moment, I almost felt something, a twinge of an ache deep within my chest. Regrets? Sorrow, perhaps? I reached out and swept a stray hair from her face. No matter. When Clara's eyes cracked open, the sensation passed. Damon? Her voice shook when she regained enough of her senses to speak. What's happening? Where am I? Her arms strained against the straps. What are you doing? Only what I must, I replied, reaching under the table to show her the empty bottle with a new label, the gold-flowing script I chose in her honor. Clara, I read, letting my finger trace the letters. Beautiful label, don't you agree? Clara's eyes flicked to my old surgical tools laid out beside her on the tray, and her skin turned pale. But I don't think she really understood what was about to happen. Not until I took up the scalpel she threatened with me so playfully earlier and dipped it in the alcohol. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. Damon, stop. You don't know what you're doing. You don't want to do this. You love me. Clara's voice trembled. And I love you. I tipped the silver blade back, pressing the point against my lip as I considered everything that led to this moment. The Tinder accounts and all that followed. All the carefully orchestrated steps I took to ensure that her heart would belong to me and me alone. The months I spent planning, drawing her in with perfect precision. Yes, I know you do. I turned around and tightened the straps binding her to the table, pausing only long enough to watch a single tear trace down her cheek. I tilted my head to the side and laid the knife along her skin to catch it on the blade. If you didn't, then your sacrifice would be useless. I lifted the knife, allowing the teardrop to dangle from the edge. You see, Clara, the scalpel did not belong to my grandfather, or his. It is mine. It has always been mine. I've kept these tools all these years to remind me of what I was before. She whimpered and struggled against her bonds, but it was a frail attempt. She couldn't help but love me. Not anymore. Her love was unconditional, real, pure. I slipped my arm free of my sleeve, sliced open a thin line at the base of my wrist, infecting my immortal soul with her weakness, her strength. It burned. A sharp breath stabbed at my lungs as the sensation took hold. Sadness, betrayal, fear, and love. Emotions so strong I hadn't felt their like for over 1,000 years. But it wasn't enough. I wanted more. I needed to feel it again, to experience what she felt every time she looked at me, every time she thought of me. The pain faded, the emotions passed, and Clara's face came back into focus, open-mouthed and trembling. I am Renee Linux descendant. I am he. I was turned many centuries ago, but contrary to legend, vampires don't drink blood to stay alive, I told her. I drink it so that I may live, so I can experience emotion and pass as human. But you are quite special to me, Clara. I reached under the sink attached to the foot end of the table, opened the valve to the tank it fed, and placed the point of the blade just under her ribcage. Your blood will ensure my humanity for a long time to come. I braced my other hand on the butt of the hilt, preparing for the initial cut, bracing myself against the scent of blood to come.
Ron and Nicole Sullivan parked their SUV in front of the badly weathered Victorian house. As successful home flippers, they knew a good investment when they saw one. They had purchased the old home sight unseen at a bank auction for pennies on the dollar. Unbeknownst to them, the price reflected the house's curious history. The Haycock house had been painstakingly planted almost a century before by an eccentric painter named Reynolds Haycock and his wife Abigail. Unlike the other homes in the area, the house had exuded no charm, warmth, or life. Because the newly planted vegetation had yet to take root, the yard was devoid of color and form, accentuating the bleakness of the property. At the house's peak were two red-stained attic windows that resembled a pair of fiery eyes, always open, always burning. The home's ominous presence unnerved anyone who walked near it. It was like a spider's web disguised as a house. It didn't welcome, it beckoned. From the start, the Haycocks had kept to themselves. They offered their neighbors little more than harsh glares and unreturned waves. Their window shades remained drawn day and night, as if they were trying to keep secrets in. The neighbors seldom saw them anywhere beyond their property. The couple had milk and groceries delivered once a week and left on their front porch. To maintain the upkeep of the property, they hired transients via an ad that they posted at the rail yard offering free room and board. Several months elapsed before anyone noticed that of all the hired hands who had entered the house, no one could recall seeing any of them come out. Rumors of foul play began to circulate about the odd and mysterious couple regarding the disappearances. Then, amidst the growing threat of police scrutiny, the Haycocks inexplicably vanished. No one noticed them moving out. They told no one where they were going, and no one saw or heard from them again. Their belongings too had vanished. All that the authorities had found was an oil painting of the couple left hanging in the drawing room. A subsequent investigation had turned up no evidence regarding the vagrants. Over the years, at least a dozen people had purchased the house to sell or to inhabit. None stayed there for more than a month. Like the original owners, they simply up and left, each leaving the vacated house to fall into foreclosure. And now here were the Sullivans, the enterprising young couple who believed more in a reasonable return rate than they did in scary stories. Ryan and Nicole leaned against the side of their SUV and stared up at the house for a moment, taking in its full measure. Ryan was grinning like a big kid, full of excitement. He marveled at the imposing house with its period architecture, ornate wrought iron fencing, and fully matured yard. Nicole was wary. She saw an abandoned property with peeling paint and a battered roof that was going to suck their budget dry.
I don't know, babe. I'm starting to think we might have bitten off more than we can chew with this one. Something feels off about it. We may have just bought ourselves nothing but a big old headache.
Well, you know what they say, Shug. Go big or go home. Speaking of big, let's hitch up our big kid pants and go see what we're dealing with. Ryan gave Nicole a quick peck on her cheek before bounding up the walkway to check out his newest toy. The sun-cracked wraparound porch creaked in time with their steps. Cobwebs and wasp nests hung down like warped chandeliers. Nicole put the key into the lock and pushed open the heavy front door. A musty odor greeted them. It smelled like an old trunk that had been opened after many years. Dust motes danced in a brilliant sun ray that was concentrated through a window like a theater spotlight. "Hell's bells on an Easter bonnet," Ryan remarked as he surveyed the old-fashioned grandeur of the aged house. He craned his neck to take in the 15-foot-tall ceiling that topped the spacious entrance. Dark mahogany floors flowed as far as they could see. Ahead and on the left, Ryan and Nicole admired a spectacular winding staircase. It resembled a decorative vine as it snaked its way along the wall. Its carpeted steps paused at a small landing before winding their way upward again. The neglected floors that had welcomed them continued beyond a solid oak archway that looked as if it had been pulled from an artisan's dream. Nicole couldn't resist running her fingertips over the masterful carvings.
"Hell's bells indeed,"
she muttered to herself. She turned to Ryan and said,
"I'm gonna check out the rest of this level. You take the other ones."
"Roger that." As Ryan ascended the handsome wooden staircase, Nicole walked forward under the archway and into a large dining room. The big open area was surrounded on three sides by floor-to-ceiling windows, which allowed the entire space to be bathed in rich sunlight. A posh wrought iron light fixture dangled from the ceiling center. Its many curled arms supported frosted globes, making it look somewhat like an elegant octopus juggling bright orbs of light. Despite the chamber's shabbiness, Nicole pondered its promising potential. The dirty work site currently surrounding Nicole was incongruous among her mental pictures of a sophisticated setting. Tools and building materials that the last flipper and his crew had left behind were strewn everywhere. The scene resembled a work site where the crew had left for lunch and never returned. From there, she entered a kitchen painted a dreary gray. Judging by its sad condition, Nicole figured it was probably the original color. The gritty floor crunched under her feet as she inspected the cracked and faded cabinetry. Out of nowhere, a cold blast of air kissed the back of Nicole's bare neck. She touched the spot and turned around. When she didn't see an obvious source for the draft, such as an open window or air duct, she shrugged it off and moved on from the kitchen. The last room she visited was a drawing room. It was the most opulent space yet, with its hand-carved oak wall panels and an intricately patterned tin ceiling from which hung a beveled glass chandelier fit for a castle. 6 stained glass windows were divided evenly among 3 walls. A pair of French doors opened out to the back portion of the wraparound porch, which gave view to the unkempt backyard. The long-neglected area was thick with grass and saplings. Nicole thought it looked like a dying cornfield that someone had left to fend for itself. The room's focal point was a large stone fireplace. It was crowned with a sturdy hand-hewed wood plank, adding to its grandiosity. Nicole imagined the powerful fires that had filled the stately room with great light and warmth. Its majestic presence enthralled her. Then she noticed a picture hanging above it. It was a large oil painting of an older man and woman. They were dressed in period clothes that looked to Nicole to be from the early 1900s. They sat stiffly in 2 beautifully upholstered wingback chairs. With facial expressions that lacked any sense of love or joy, the duo exuded an austere countenance. At the woman's feet laid a fluffy white cat that looked as indifferent as the couple. The signature on the bottom right-hand corner indicated that it was a self-portrait.
So you're the infamous art freaks.
Nicole said.
Ain't you the party animals?
Upstairs, Ryan discovered similar scenes of abandonment. There were wooden floors that had been sanded but never finished. He found several doors stacked neatly in the hall. Ryan entered one of the bedrooms to look for damage. As he poked at a deep hole in one of the walls, a shadow of a man appeared beside it, causing him to jump back. He turned. No one. When he looked at the wall again, the silhouette was gone. Ryan's arm hair stood on end. Easy does it, dude. Lots of shadows in this old place. Let's just get out of here. Ryan trotted out of the room and into the hallway. Suddenly, another form stepped in front of him, causing him to skid to a halt. Christ, Nicole, you scared the Keebler fudge out of me. He was breathing hard and sweating.
I scared you. Good Lord, Ryan, you nearly steamrolled me. What's wrong with you? You're whiter than an albino in a snowstorm.
Ryan took a few seconds to recover. Once he regained his composure, he became embarrassed and defensive. Nothing's wrong with me. I was trying to get away from a couple of wasps. He quickly changed the subject. What'd you find downstairs? Or should I even ask?
Well, we'll have to check the basement, the foundation, the plumbing, and the wiring. But as far as I can tell, it's got good bones. It just needs a few new ones. I have to tell you, though, it looks like one of those Wild West ghost towns down there. And this place was bustling with construction, and then, poof, it's deserted.
Yeah, same thing up here. Guess the guy ran out of money. No pay, no workers.
Okay, but if the construction crew isn't getting paid, why would they leave their tools and building supplies behind? Those things ain't cheap.
Who knows? Want to check out the rest? He asked.
That seems only proper,
Nicole replied with a hokey Old West accent. As they headed downstairs, Ryan cast a nervous glance over his shoulder. After completing the initial inspection, their next task was to set up a temporary camp upstairs in the main bedroom. With a project of this magnitude, they preferred to stay on site because it saved them the expense of a lengthy hotel stay and allowed them to keep the place secure. It only took them a couple of days to bring in a contractor familiar with projects such as theirs. Todd Blake came highly recommended by some of the top-tier realtors from the area. After meeting with Ryan and Nicole, he agreed to take on the lengthy and arduous renovation. He explained that he was at least 2 weeks out with his current job. Still, he offered up some suggestions for easy tasks that they could knock out in the meantime. Nicole had a group of chores already nestled in her head. For herself, she planned on some mowing, pruning, and the planting of a colorful flower bed along the front of the porch. She decided to place Ryan in charge of doing something about the awful gray paint that made the kitchen look like a monochrome monstrosity. Nicole had something perky in mind, such as a vibrant yellow. Ryan obeyed Sergeant Nicole's order to paint the kitchen. The following day, he drove to Pinehurst to check out a newly foreclosed property on a Parkland golf course. Such premium real estate didn't come on the market often, so he wanted to get first dibs. Nicole stayed behind to keep an eye on things at the Haycock house. With Ryan gone, the place was too quiet. The air felt cold and thick, and many of the rooms were dark despite their oversized windows. Also, seeing the rough condition of the house's interior left her feeling overwhelmed and defeated. The pall over the place made Nicole's decision to work outside an easy one. The anxiety that Nicole had experienced inside of the foreboding residence dissipated once she stepped outside into the fresh air of the peaceful morning. The sounds of the birds and the swishes of the undulating tree limbs filled her ears. The day was warm, the ground was moist, and the shade felt exquisite. It was early morning, so she had most of the day to work on the new flower bed before the summer sun worked its way around to the front of the house. As she enjoyed the peacefulness of it, Nicole became lost in the motion of the work. She checked her watch and realized that she had been toiling for hours.
Jeez Louise, no wonder I'm hungry.
Nicole stood, bent her aching knees, and dusted the pot and soil off the front of her shorts. As she rose, there was a flash of something in the corner of her eye. She glanced back toward the house. A large cat perched on the top step of the porch was leering at her.
Hey there, pussycat.
The cat narrowed its eyes and hissed at her like an angry cobra.
Shoo!
Nicole yelled. The cat rose and snarled at her. Suddenly it turned and ran through the open front door of the house. Nicole took off after it. Once inside, she proceeded through some of the first-floor rooms, watching and listening for the furry intruder.
Where'd you go, you little jerk?
Nicole heard a growl nearby. She stepped cautiously through the freshly painted kitchen. She stopped to peek into one of the open cabinets.
Here, kitty, kitty.
Nicole froze at the voice, the cabinet door half open. Its tone was distinctly feminine. It had echoed from the drawing room. Nicole hoped that the call was from the cat's owner, who'd tracked it into the house.
Please, don't be an intruder. Of all the times for Ryan to be gone.
Nicole's jaw quaked with nervousness.
Who's there? Hello?
The lack of response made her fearful that someone might be lying in wait for her. Realizing that she couldn't hide out in the kitchen indefinitely, she worked up the courage to go and investigate the sound. Nicole followed the haunting call into the drawing room and found it empty. Despite being alone, she was skittish, as if someone might attack her out of thin air. She trembled.
The porch.
She reasoned.
Maybe the backyard?
She tiptoed to the doors that led out to the porch. Cautiously opening them, she leaned out and looked around. Seeing no signs of the interloper, she relaxed a bit. She hoped that whoever had been in the room when she called out from the kitchen had fled. Her adrenaline ebbing, Nicole blew out a cleansing breath. As she was doing so, she happened to glance up at the portrait of the Haycocks. Something about it looked different, but she couldn't quite... Nicole jumped a foot as a streak of screaming fur blurred past her feet, heading straight for the front door. Nicole braked when she got to the top step of the porch. The cat had vanished. She had left the porch and searched the yard but saw no sign of it. Once she was satisfied that the cat had moved on, she decided to go back in and dig up some lunch. When she reached the foot of the porch steps, she saw that all of the new flowers were dead. It was as if the soil had poisoned them. Despite the heat of the day, Nicole shivered. Although she rationalized the phantom voice, she had no answer for the inexplicable demise of the once colorful blooms.
What's happening around this place?
The implications chilled her. Ryan had gotten back earlier than expected, much to Nicole's relief. He'd picked up a pizza, 2 salads, and a bottle of Pinot Grigio on the way home, so they wouldn't have to go out and leave the house unattended. On his way in, he noticed the wilted flowers. Who planted these? The Angel of Death? As they stood over the makeshift sawhorse table eating their dinner, Ryan brought Nicole up to date on the property in Pinehurst. Nicole typically asked a whole host of questions, but tonight she was shaken and distracted. Something up, hon? He inquired. You're not saying much. Did anything happen while I was gone? Nicole picked at her salad and considered the question. Nicole?
Yeah. I mean, no.
She paused.
Okay, maybe something weird did happen. It's probably nothing worth talking about anyway.
Ryan set the slice of pizza down, then took a sip of his wine. I think it might be worth talking about. I've never seen you this quiet and tense. Talk to me. What happened today? Nicole related the entire cat incident to Ryan. She could tell by the way he was staring at her that he wasn't taking her seriously at first. But could he be blamed? As she spoke, even she became increasingly unsure of her story. To Ryan's credit, he listened to everything she was sharing. It gave her hope that even if he thought she was beginning to get spooked in the shadowy old house, at least he might try to work through the events with her and to make some sense of them. "Are you sure you heard someone speaking?" he asked.
As clear as I'm hearing you now. And then there's the flowers I spent the morning planting.
"Yeah, I caught sight of them on the way in. What happened there?"
When I couldn't find the cat, I walked back to the porch. I found them looking the same way you did. It totally freaked me out. So what do you think? Am I starting to lose it here?
"That's a weird one, all right. I might walk around and talk to some of the neighbors, find out who owns the cat. What'd it look like?"
It was all white and fluffy. A Persian, I think.
"Oh, like the one in the painting." Nicole's face slackened as it came to her while the portrait had looked different. She left the dining room and went directly to the drawing room, ignoring Ryan calling behind her. There, above the fireplace, was the portrait, with the white Persian properly in its place. The mid-July heat in the Carolinas was relentless, the night air stifling and humid. The Sullivans' bedroom windows were wide open, and they'd set the ceiling fan to stomp. Nicole was lying in bed, replaying the events of the day. Each recollection was like a ghostly hand trying to pull her down into a dark lake. But even as disturbing thoughts kept threatening to overwhelm her, Nicole remained emotionally tethered to her intense feeling of annoyance with Ryan. Despite everything, he'd still somehow managed to fall asleep effortlessly. It reminded her that he always got to play the charming laid-back role, forcing her to be the hardline negotiator.
That's right. You sleep well like you always do. I'll just keep on lying awake nearly every night worrying about what'll happen when one of these investments blows up in our faces. That and ghost cats.
As the night flowed onward, her resentment gave way to envy.
How in the heck can he sleep on this crappy air mattress, in this sauna, with that ancient ceiling fan while I lie here sweating like a whore in church?
She flipped back and forth on the mattress as if she were a strip of meat, trying to be cooked evenly on both sides. But it meant that she wasn't dreaming when she heard the footsteps downstairs.
Oh, dear God, there's a crackhead in the house.
The sound seemed to be coming from the foot of the stairs. She nudged Ryan.
Ryan!
She whispered. When Ryan didn't respond, she shook him.
Ryan, wake up.
Nicole could tell when the intruder had made it in as far as the landing by the creak of the third floorboard.
Ryan! Ryan! Get the hell up!
At this point, she didn't care if the prowler heard her or not. Why? He mumbled.
Don't you hear that?
The footsteps were coming down the hall toward them. It didn't sound as if the burglar was in a hurry to get to their bedroom. There was at least a full second between each plodding step. As he drew closer, they heard his shoes squeaking. "What the hell?" Ryan said as he awoke to the realization that they were in danger. He propelled himself off the air mattress and rushed to lock their bedroom door. Then he ran back to Nicole, who was now on her feet. The footsteps arrived at their door. "I have a gun in here," Ryan shouted. "Leave, or I will shoot you dead." All he heard was the squeal of the ceiling fan. "Hey, I'm counting to 3, and then I'm coming out blazing."
What should we do?
Nicole whispered. "Grab the phone and go lock yourself in the bathroom. Call 911. I'm going to go check things out."
Are you insane?
Nicole asked, punching him on the shoulder for emphasis.
Stay here with me. He may still be outside that door.
"Babe, if I don't hold this guy off, the only thing that the cops are going to find is the 2 of us dead. Now go hide in the bathroom." Nicole started to cry.
Ryan, baby, please stay here with me.
"Nicole, for once, let me handle this. Now go." Nicole grabbed the phone and tiptoed to the bathroom, locking the door behind her. Her hands were shaking, making it difficult to press the numbers. As soon as someone answered the call, she said,
"Hi, I'm calling to report an intruder. He's just outside our bedroom door."
She waited for the dispatcher to ask for her name and address, but the person didn't say anything. Nicole was anxious and impatient.
"Hello? Is this 911?
The only sound she heard on the other end was a raspy breathing. She gasped and hung up. She tried twice more and got the same response. Meanwhile, Ryan looked around for something to use as a weapon. The only thing he saw with any heft was the large flashlight by the air mattress. Weapon in hand, Ryan crept to the door and put his ear against it. His spine tingled as he listened to the gruff wheezing on the other side. The sound reminded him of his Uncle Jerry, who had struggled with emphysema. It was how he had sounded at the end, like dry death. Ryan stepped back and braced himself for a confrontation. He took a couple of deep breaths, raised the flashlight, and yanked the door open. The doorway was empty. He stuck his neck out, looked up and down the dimly lit hall, and found it equally empty. Like a vanishing cat, he thought.
"Ryan, what's happening out there?"
Ryan had never heard such terror in anyone's voice before. "It's okay, hon. Just stay put." Then, for the benefit of the trespasser, he added, "I think the cops are nearly here." His proclamation yielded no results. No running, no crashing, no sound. Ryan turned on the flashlight and shined it up and down the passageway, but still saw nothing. His head drooped as he let out a shaky sigh. He lowered his eyes and caught a quick shimmer on the floor near his feet. He stared. Footprints. They led from the top of the stairs to the bedroom door. Ryan stooped to touch the light-colored tracks and found them sticky. He stood and began tracing them, following them down the hallway to the stairs. Ryan descended the dark staircase. The powerful beam from the flashlight illuminated the phantom imprints. The more he tracked them, the more slippery the flashlight became in his hand. He continued following the trail down to the main staircase. From there, he worked his way through the dining room, then the pitch-black kitchen, before ending up in the drawing room. The point of origin was the fireplace hearth. Goosebumps sprang from Ryan's flesh, and his teeth began chattering. He slid his socked feet across the floor until he was standing in front of the fireplace. He lifted the flashlight's ray to the portrait. At first glance, the painting looked as it always had. He wanted to get a better look, so he inched forward until he was standing directly under it. That's when he saw the yellow paint around Reynolds Haycock's shoes. "I need a drink." Ryan shuffled to the lightless kitchen. He groped around until he located the wall switch and flipped it on. Someone had somehow removed the fresh yellow paint from the kitchen walls. The series of macabre events left Ryan feeling rattled. It took some time for him to collect his thoughts.
"Ryan, where are you?"
Nicole's loud voice startled him. "In the kitchen, hon." She was about to walk in when Ryan stopped her. "Babe, I want you to prepare yourself. Please try not to freak out."
"I'll do my best,"
she promised. Nicole said nothing during her tour of the kitchen and the drawing room. She walked as if she were trudging through mud. When she finally spoke, she said,
"Oh my God, Ryan. What have we gotten ourselves into? I'm really, truly terrified. We have to get out of this house. I can't stay here another second. Let's go to a hotel or rent an apartment. I don't care which."
"Nicole, honey, we can't afford that. We've got everything tied up in this house. Outside of living in the SUV, we have zero options, and there is no way we're living out of that stupid SUV."
"Like hell we're not."
Nicole grabbed Ryan by his wrist, led him outside, and directed him into the SUV. Ryan's pride was slightly sore, but at least Nicole had gotten them out of the house of horrors. A short time later, Ryan attempted to appeal to Nicole's sense of reason. "Babe, what are we supposed to do now? That surprise real estate I checked out in Pinehurst looks really promising. But you know this business. We can't grab hold of any other opportunities while we're still holding on to this one. If we unload this house now, we'll get our heads kicked in. Nicole, I know we're scared, but we have no choice. We have to make this work."
Ryan, how bad would this get? This isn't some elaborate prank. All of the terrifying things that have happened to us are real. Think about it. The contractors, the work crews, previous owners. Why do you think we got this house so cheap? It's because everyone else took the loss and got as far away from this place as possible.
Look, I'm no expert on the paranormal, okay? But maybe we can find a priest or a shaman or even a voodoo doctor who'll come and bless the place. Ooh, how about a TV show that'll send some crackpots out here to stink up the house with loser sweat while they pretend to gab with ghosts? Her emotional temperature was rising. She resented Ryan's condescending tone, so she decided to give him a taste of his own medicine.
Just to make sure that an idiot like me can understand you, you're saying we should advertise that we have ghosts in this house? Oh yeah, that'll prompt some genius to buy it.
All right, Nicole, what do you suggest? She mulled the question over.
Everything that's happening has a common denominator. That creepy portrait, right? Why don't we just try getting rid of it? Let's burn the SOB like they do in the movies. If nothing else, at least we won't have to look at it anymore.
Ryan perked up. I've got the matches if you've got the fuel. You go around back and find a safe place to burn it. I'll be the hero and go in and get it.
Works for me, Sir Dunderhead.
And she's back.
Just go ahead and get it already.
Nicole retrieved the 2-gallon gas can from the rear of the SUV and hurried toward the backyard. When she got there, she waded through the knee-high grass until she got to a worn-down area that someone had used as a scrap pile. She picked through the trash for something to use as a digging instrument. Eventually, she found a jagged piece of 2x4 that she used to dig a shallow hole. Ryan emerged from the drawing room and onto the back porch. He was holding the sinister portrait as if it were covered in poison ivy.
Hurry, bring it,
Nicole instructed. Ryan used the picture frame to push through the overgrown yard. As soon as he arrived at the impromptu fire pit, he plopped the painting down into it and soaked it with the gasoline. Then he tossed in a lit book of matches. As the picture burned, they could feel the stress gradually leaving their bodies. They watched the cursed object curl up at the edges as the ravenous flames consumed it. Once the fire had reduced the portrait to glowing ash, they took hold of each other's hand and reluctantly returned to the house. As soon as Ron and Nicole stepped inside, they sensed a change. The air that used to press down on them felt lighter, and everything looked sharper as if someone had adjusted an unfocused lens.
Do you think it's finally over?
Nicole asked.
I have to say, something feels right about this place now. It's different from before, don't you think? It feels healed.
Yeah, I suppose so. I just hope that Gomez and Morticia have moved on.
Guess they didn't want strangers changing their house around,
she said.
I can't say as I blame them. After all, they meant this house for themselves. They poured their souls into it. Every nail, every brick. That painting was probably all that was left to anchor them here.
Then Nicole looked at Ryan, who had suddenly become lost in thought. I can't help but wonder, he said, if anyone else ever thought of destroying the painting.
If they did, they sure didn't stick around long enough to try it. So what do you say? Should we try another night?
Are you sure? An hour ago you wanted out of here.
I know what I said, but I just want to know if this nightmare is finally over, so we can move on.
Agreed. Ryan said. Though the night had been uneventful, neither slept very well. Every minor noise had sounded to them as if it were heralding another march of the undead. They'd been glad when the sun had finally risen to rescue them.
We better get started on the cleanup. Todd's work crew will be here next week,
Nicole said. Why don't we just let them fix it? Ryan asked, yawning.
Money, sweetheart, money. We can do this. Listen, I think we still have some cereal downstairs. Grab the milk from the cooler, why don't you?
Ryan and Nicole got dressed and then followed the ghostly road map downstairs. They checked out the drawing room, hoping and praying not to find a painting there waiting for them. Notwithstanding the yellow footprints, they were relieved to see that the portrait was still out of their lives, unlike in the movies. They entered the kitchen and enjoyed a relaxed breakfast.
I'll be so happy once we get that paint off the floor,
Nicole said.
It's what's creeped me out the most. Oh, and speaking of paint, you know that they're going to have to paint this entire kitchen all over again. Any thoughts on color?
I think we might go with yellow. It stands out so well, don't you think?
You do? And I'll be repainting it with your brain matter, wise guy. Now come on, let's get this knocked out. We've got a lot to get done today.
They had only walked a few feet into the drawing room before they stopped cold. They were astonished to see that the footprints were gone. Where'd they go? Ryan asked. Frigid sweat slid down Nicole's bare back like cold skeletal fingers. She was pale, her body limp.
Ryan?
Her voice quivered.
Do you see it?
Oh my God, he whispered. With great trepidation, they walked further into the room. Ryan took hold of Nicole's moist hand. I'm right here, babe. His breathing was fast and irregular. With each pant, he could feel his heartbeat through his temples, as if it were keeping time with a funeral dirge. They turned together and faced the imposing fireplace, the source of their blind terror. The painting was hanging over the mantel, and it had changed. The haycocks were posed in a standing position by their respective chairs. Each of their faces was a horrifying rictus of rage. In a blink, they were closer to the frame. Their cracked lips were pulled back grotesquely, bearing small, jagged teeth. Then, like a flash of lightning, the savage creatures were at the very edge of the frame. Their eyes were crimson red, just like those belonging to the white Persian hunched up behind Ryan and Nicole, snarling. The front door opened and the real estate agent led Frank and Helen Morgenstern into the vestibule of the musty house. And here we are, the agent announced with a grand flourish.
Wow,
Frank said.
I hope the rest of the house has this much potential,
added Helen. The agent took that as his cue. Now, as I told you, there have been some attempts at renovations over the years, but it's still in need of some TLC. Nevertheless, with what the bank's willing to let it go for, it would make a terrific investment for folks like you who are thinking about converting it into a bed and breakfast. Now, follow me. I want you to check out the focal point of the whole downstairs. The couple strolled around the impressive drawing room, taking in its regal decor's richness, along with its exquisite fireplace.
So, who's this?
Helen asked as she stood before the long rustic mantel. Oh, them. Yes, I believe that's the Haycocks, the people for whom this house was built. Now then, let's see if I can remember their names. That's Reynolds sitting on the left and Abigail on the right. As for the young couple holding the cat, I don't know who they are, but they sure don't look very thrilled to be there.
October 2:23 a.m., California Highway 99, northbound.
Get your butt down here and visit your boy! You ain't seen him in near a month!
The voice screamed out of the little cell phone speaker. Dale held the phone away from his ear with one hand and kept an ironclad grip on the steering wheel of his Mack truck with the other. His ex-wife's rant was going into overtime, and he wished he knew enough about his new cell phone to know if it had a volume control. Go where the work is. Damn it, Velma. You know that.
Don't give me that crap! That's the same excuse you used to spend time with that whore in!
Her voice faded, and when it roared back, it was punctuated with the static pop.
Kill me.
Dale brought the phone back up to his ear. What'd you say, Velma?
Don't pretend you don't know who I'm talking about. I know.
The signal faded again, then came back. The voice panicked.
I don't want to die. Can anyone... Please...
That didn't sound like Velma. His ex-wife would cut off her tits before she asked anyone for help. Dale held the phone out, glancing at the little screen. The words, "weak signal," flashed. He brought the phone back to his ear. Velma, what the hell are you talking about?
Please help me.
It wasn't Velma. This voice sounded younger and terrified. Who is this? The voice dropped in and out. Dale was only getting fragments.
Sandra, please. Gonna kill her. I can't move.
All right, calm down. Tell me where you are.
End of Route 194. Cave. Drag race.
Come again?
Raced a red spider down Route 194. Can't move. Dead bodies all over.
Dale's heart skipped a beat. He held the phone away from his ear as a familiar feeling rumbled in his gut. It felt like standing in front of a large, ominous door that was opening slowly, creaking on old, tired hinges, leading to places Dale never looks for, but always seems to find. He sighed and touched the phone back to his cheek. I'm northbound on the 99. Which way are you on the 194, east or west? No answer.
Hey, Sandra, east or west?
Silence. Dale pulled the phone away, looking at the tiny screen. No signal. Goddamn Chinese piece of crap! Dale pressed a few buttons on the phone, trying to get the call back, but he didn't really know what he was doing. After a few seconds, Velma's voice popped back in, loud and clear.
That best friend of yours is so dumb he couldn't find his ass with both hands in his pockets.
Jesus, Dale said, then pressed the red button, hoping it would send Velma's voice back to whatever cellular hell it had come from. The connection was cut with a chirp, and Dale tossed the phone toward the passenger seat, where it landed in the box it had come in. Well, that was that. Route 194 stretched across California for miles, without any hint of direction. He didn't have a chance of finding Sandra what's-her-name. He let out a long breath, somewhat relieved that the doorway to places filled with cries for help, dead bodies, and whatever else that had always found him between the ungodly hours of midnight and dawn was closed. Still, as the miles rolled by, he couldn't let it go. Maybe he'd feel better if he told someone. Dale reached down for the CB mic and was thinking about switching to the emergency channel when,
Hey, Twilight Man, you got your ears on? Come back.
Dale grinned at the sound of his friend's voice, Earl, coming out of the CB speaker. He brought the mic to his lips, pressed the call button. This here's the Twilight Man. How you doing, Nightcrawler?
Well, my butt is rawer than a $2 pavement princess and you know what. Other than that, I'm just Ducky. I'm back sliding down the grapevine on the rebound, looking to make camp in Bakersfield. Knew you were in the area. Wondered if you wanted to gather the wagons at a chewing choke for some breakfast. Come back.
Dale looked at his watch. midnight. Sounds good, but hey, listen. I got this call on my cell I'd like to run by you.
Stop the presses. You got your cell phone?
Dale groaned softly. Yes, let's not make a big deal out of it.
Damn, I needs to alert the media. Dale got himself a cell phone. It's like you're joining the human race and everything. Welcome To the 20th century, good buddy,
Earl said. It's the 21st century, numbnuts. Dale glanced over at the phone laying in its packaging. Picked this thing up about an hour ago. Thought I'd try to give my boy a holler since it's his birthday tomorrow. But, of course, Velma picked up.
Oh, you have my condolences,
Earl said.
How is Bitchzilla?
Dale chuckled. Still queen of the harpies. Anyway, someone's voice broke in on the call.
Well, that can happen, especially if you go cheap,
Earl said.
Let me guess. You got a flip phone. One that costs about $11.99? Swear, Dale, you pinch pennies so tight you can hear old Abe Lincoln squealing.
Dale sighed. He hated how well his friend knew him. It was $9.99 and the guy at the truck stop threw in a box of red vines. Now, do you want to hear this or not?
My ears are on. Come back.
Dale quickly recapped what he'd heard before the signal faded. So, what do you think?
Well, that's stranger than Liberace at a football game. I assumes she was talking about a car. Say like an Alfa Romeo Spider.
Could be, but I don't know. Didn't get that kind of detail.
I wonder if she meant mines.
What was that? Come back, Dale said.
Yeah, you said something about a cave. Maybe she's held up in those mines off the 194, about 2 miles west.
How do you know about mines way out there?
I knows lots of things. I'm not just pretty. There's copper mines. Closed, I think. Don't you remember there was that college kid last year that died while the spelunkering?
Do you mean spelunking?
Yeah, sounds right. No idea what it is, but apparently you can die doing it.
Dale's eyes followed an exit marker. He just passed the turnoff for Route 193 and knew 194 wasn't far away. Just keep on trucking, he told himself. In a few minutes he could be in Bakersfield, enjoying food guaranteed to hurry him along toward an early death. He was getting too old for this shit.
So, what you gonna do, Twilight Man?
Earl's voice popped over the CB. Dale took in a deep breath, letting it out slowly. He was trying to push the terror in the girl's voice from his mind. But, as he exhaled, he realized just how much she had sounded like his youngest niece in Knoxville. The girl's call for help wasn't something he could just drive on by. God damn. Son bitch. He always felt nothing good could come from buying a cell phone. And damn if he wasn't right. With a sour expression on his face, Dale put his turn signal on and steered the rig toward the approaching exit. Route 194. What's your 20? Dale said into the CB after exiting the freeway.
About 35 miles from your back door. Guess breakfast will have to wait. Come back.
Well, drop the hammer, old man. It's too goddamn early for breakfast anyway. Turning on his high beams, Dale exited, then turned west. The dual beams of light cut a path through the darkness, revealing field after field of agricultural endeavors. After 2 miles, the farmland fell away, and rolling hills silhouetted in the soft moonlight rose up on either side of the road. The truck began to vibrate as the tar-covered surface disappeared. Gravel took its place for a few hundred feet. Then that dissolved, leaving just a dirt path. Dale was just about to throw in the towel when at the edge of his high beams, he could see a sign. Hope Mine, 1/2 mile. The sign had a painted arrow indicating a right turn onto another dirt road running south. He brought the truck to a stop in front of the sign and gazed down the southbound path, dark and nameless. Although the sign appeared to be a half-century old, there were a dozen tire tracks, maybe more, some very recent. He steered south, finding that the new dirt road was not much smoother than the other one. His truck shook and vibrated over every hole, kicking up dust. After he had gone the length of several football fields, he could see taillights glinting in his beams. First 1 pair, then 2. Then about a dozen flickered in the darkness, like distant stars. Cars lined the dirt road, and although they looked abandoned sitting in the dark, some caked with dust, they all appeared to be new. Modified street racers, tediously tricked out. resting silently in the night. Their owners, who had obviously spent considerable time and money to make these vehicles look ridiculously fast and furious, were nowhere to be found. "What the hell?" Dale said. "Where's a party?" The road ended, and Dale eased the truck over, parking alongside a racing green Acura with a rear foil on it big enough to be used as a surfboard. Not the kind of car likely to be found on a rural dirt road. Just ahead, Dale could see the entrance to the mine. It wasn't what he'd expected. All the images of mines he'd ever seen were products of Hollywood. Big railroad ties framing the entrance to a dingy-looking cave with some kind of sign that usually read, "Danger," or "Keep out." The Hope Mine was more of a hole, and from Dale's point of view, high up in the cab, he could see it burrowing down into a blasted hill at an angle steep enough to make walking difficult, but doable. Dale was already picturing himself sliding on his ass down the gullet of the hole into the waiting arms of God knows what. He fumbled under the seat and reached into a compartment so concealed no scale inspector, border patrol, DEA, or cop would ever discover without completely dismantling the cab. He pulled out a Christmas gift from a few years back, a sawed-off, double-barreled shotgun with a CB handle carved into the stock. His mom always knew what to get him. After stuffing a half-dozen shells in his pocket, he reached behind the seat and grabbed something else he was sure he was going to need. A rope. The CB crackled to life.
"Twilight Man, this is Nightcrawler. Come back."
Dale picked up the mic. "Yeah, what's up, Earl?"
"Good, buddy. You ain't gonna believe this. Guess what just blew my doors off?"
Dale sighed. "I'm a little busy right now. Can we play this game later?"
"It was moving like a bat out of hell. Thought it might even leave the ground."
"Well, what was it?"
"A red spider."
Dale swallowed. Come again?"
"Could have been scarlet, but I swear to God it was redder than a Catholic girl on her wedding night."
"Your eyes on straight?"
"Hell yeah. I'd say it was a 1965 Alfa Romeo hardtop. Did I call it?"
"Yes, you called it. You're very wise."
"And Purdy."
"I'm willing to bet it wasn't Solo," Dale said.
"No, sir, it was not."
Earl came back.
"How'd you know?"
"Well, you're not the only one who's more than just pretty. What'd you see?"
"Looked like a yellow, could have been white Honda Civic. All souped up, racing alongside. You know them street racing life-size Hot Wheels kids are spending all their coin on?"
Dale looked over the graveyard of cars, any one of which could have been owned by the late Paul Walker. "Yeah, I have a pretty good idea of what you're talking about. Everybody wants to be Vin Diesel."
"What's a Vin Diesel?"
Forget it. Which way'd they go?"
"Heading north. I bet my left nut they're heading your way."
"Yeah, that's a big 10-4. And, why the left nut?"
"Well, I'm extra partial to my right one. Have been ever since I discovered what they were."
"Very sorry I asked. What's your 20?
"I just passed Route 190.
"Jeez, Earl, you move slower than turtle shit."
Bitch.
Dale told Earl what he had found and what he planned on doing, even though he hadn't really convinced himself yet.
"You really going down there?"
Earl said. Dale scratched his head, pondering the wisdom of his plan. He brought the mic up to his lips. "You didn't hear that kid's voice. If she were my kin, I'd sure as hell want someone to go after her." He leaned over and removed a flashlight from the glove box.
"You ain't even sure she's down there?"
Dale turned the flashlight on, shining it over the dust-covered cars. "Well, she ain't up here, that's for sure. If you don't find me when you get here, call in the cavalry." Before Earl signed off, he urged Dale to take his cell phone. Dale reluctantly agreed and gave his friend the number. Dale slung the rope over his shoulder and stepped out of the cab. He buttoned up his leather vest, then stepped to the front of his rig. He secured one end of the rope to the bumper, then strolled toward the mine. Upon reaching it, his boots knocked a few rocks down into the darkness. He scanned back up the road that brought him here, checking for approaching headlights. Nothing. Darkness. He wasn't worried about the driver of the Red Spider. Dale could deal with some young punk street racer turned serial killer, if that is what this was. Running cargo across the United States in the dead of night for a living allowed Dale the frequent opportunity to meet a wide variety of assholes. Mr. Alfa Romeo Spider was nothing special, but as he gazed back down into the opening in the earth, the hair on the back of his neck stood up, and he couldn't extinguish the feeling that something was looking back up at him. Something cold, something unfriendly, something ugly. "I'm coming, kid." Dale tossed the rope down and the blackness seemed to swallow it. He turned on the flashlight, chasing away the dark, and was relieved to see that the floor seemed to level out about 20 feet down into the mine. He gripped the rope and began his descent, boots sliding in loose earth. His 240-plus pounds of muscle and well-fed trucker's physique created an avalanche of gravel, limestone, and thick dust. If there was something down there waiting for him, he had made enough noise to let it know he was coming. With each step, the air got colder, and something else assaulted his senses. A thick stench started to rise, pungent, adding weight and a foul color to the air. It was a recognizable aroma, one Dale had taken in more times than anyone ever should. But his familiarity with the smell didn't desensitize him to it. He gagged, tasted vomit, and his eyes watered as he moved closer to the source of decay and rot. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, tied it around his mouth and nose like a train robber. The metal material did a piss-poor job, but it filtered the stench enough so that his eyes stopped tearing up like a little girl. Preoccupied with not puking, he almost didn't notice that the texture of the walls had changed. He shined the light on both sides and up onto the ceiling, seeing a silky thread weaving its way around the rock. Oh, wonderful. Bugs, he thought. The thread seemed to get thicker the deeper he went. It even started to spread onto the floor, winding over long, horizontal boulders pressed up against the wall. He had passed a half-dozen of these elongated rocks wound up tightly in silk before he realized they weren't boulders. They were bodies. Crap on a cracker. Dale knelt down next to one, peeling away some of the strands with the barrel of the shotgun. It was a strange-looking corpse. It looked like the mummies in the Chicago Museum he got to gawk at as a kid, all dried up, shriveled. But no mummy he ever saw wore a Raiders cap. The light glinted off the NFL logo, and as Dale tapped it with the shotgun, the corpse's jaw dropped open with a crack. Dale stood back up, watching a spider the size of his hand crawl out from the shriveled body's throat. He noticed others crawling about, none larger than his palm. They moved over the bodies, feeding, their fangs pumping up and down, drinking in their meal. Dale narrowed his eyes, his blood beginning to boil. He turned on a heel and started heading deep into the mine. When he could, he adjusted his steps so that each one was followed by a crunching sound, bringing a satisfied grin to Dale's face as spiders died under his alligator skin boots. "Sandra?" he began to call, not giving a crap about being stealthy. If there was something down here wanting a fight, he was in the mood to oblige. Sandra's name echoed down the passage, and Dale could hear it reverberating for miles. He checked every body he passed for signs of life, knocking spiders to the ground with the barrel of his gun. The bodies were in various stages of decomposition, some looking very fresh, but none were alive. He stopped to deliver an occasional twist of the heel as arachnids died underfoot, but he began to notice that the further he went into the belly of this nest, the more eight-legged bastards there were to crush. He burped out a sigh, beginning to feel defeated. If he went much deeper, they might grow so numerous he wouldn't be able to dispatch them with a simple twist of the boot. They were already starting to drop onto his arms and shoulders from the ceiling. Damn it! On the verge of turning back, his flashlight caught something silver and metallic on the ground. A smartphone. A hand lay on the dirt floor, still and close to the phone. Dale followed the arm up to its silk-cocooned body hanging from the ceiling. Enough silk strands had been torn away that an arm had managed to get free. Even beneath the wrapping, Dale could see that this body was fresher than the rest. Dale stepped over and pulled at the tightly wound silk around the torso. Big glittering letters in the girl's t-shirt read, "American Idol." He placed 2 fingers on her jugular. Nothing. He checked again. Still nothing. He bent down and retrieved the phone. A name was printed on the protective case. Sandra Cleveland. Damn. I'm sorry, Sandra. Just not quick enough. Dale swatted at the spiders that had their fangs in her, then crushed a few under his boot, cursing. He was just twisting his heel on the last one when he heard the sound of engines. At least 2. He wiped his feet in the dirt, grinning. Now let's go deal with Mr. Serial-killing, spider-loving son of a bitch. With the shotgun over his shoulder, he began to jog back toward the entrance. The sounds of the cars were getting louder, engines revving. By the time he reached the rope near the entrance, one of the engines had been killed. A voice drifted down the holes as Dale climbed up.
I beat you, bitch! Now, get out of that historical artifact you call a car!
Dale reached the mouth of the mine and stepped up into the night. The first thing he saw was a teenage male, just old enough to shave, wearing an oversized sweatsuit, an unnecessary amount of gold chains around his neck, and a cap with the bill pointed backward. He was jumping up and down, and every few seconds he would perform some ludicrous dance move that the white kid clearly believed he had mastered.
Beat you fat and square, I beat you fat and square,
the teenager said, moving away from his modified street racer, a Honda Civic, with a chrome blower rising from the hood. He walked and sort of danced over the Italian car, a red Alfa Romeo Spider.
Come on out! Let's see you losing biatch ass.
The Spider just idled patiently as if it were waiting for something. Its black-tinted windows seemed to be keeping all its owner's secrets, and, as Dale stared at it, a chill moved through his body. It suddenly occurred to him that there may be more than one shithead in the Spider. 2, maybe 3 he could deal with, but if there were more and they were armed... He decided to conceal himself, watch a while, and see what he was up against. He crouched down behind a pile of rocks just outside the mine's entrance as the teenager continued to taunt the driver of the Spider.
Hey, you gonna show yourself or what? It's time to pay up, bitch! Let's see the pink slip!
The teenager kicked the front tire of the Alfa Romeo. The Spider's engine revved, and the kid took several steps back. The engine roared again, and the car began to vibrate violently, looking like a rocket moments before leaving the launch pad. Dale felt the ground trembling beneath him. The teenager held up his hands as if he suddenly realized where he was, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by derelict streetcars.
You know what? Just keep it, man.
He took 2 more steps back.
I don't want that antique roadshow anyhow.
Before the kid took another step backward, the engine suddenly switched off. The roar faded with the suddenness that took Dale by surprise. And then, the Spider was still. Dale stared at the car's windows, looking for movement. Nothing.
So, all right then, the teenager said, tugging at his cap. I'll catch up with you on the road, biatch.
The hardtop roof of the Spider began to move, accompanied by a high-pitched mechanical whine. The roof opened like the hood of a car. Dale rubbed his hairy chin. No idea Alfa Romeos could do that. The roof continued up and back until it lay flat on the trunk. The machinery that moved it cut off with a choke, creating a cold silence. The teenager took a step forward.
That is sick! You tricked that yourself?
Out of the opening in the Spider, a female head started to rise like a disembodied apparition. Long hair spun over her scalp, so black it melted into the night. A slender, creamy-skinned neck bled into smooth, naked shoulders. Her hands rose, gripping the top of the windshield. The teenager smiled at her. "Hey, babe. You know I don't really want this time machine." He pointed at the spider. "Maybe we could work something else out? Do you know what I'm saying?" The woman smiled back, her black lips framing white teeth. She ascended further, revealing round, naked breasts, nipples hard and gray. "Oh yeah," the teenager said, stepping forward. "I like a woman that drives commando." "Watch yourself, kid," Dale muttered softly. She rose up even more, as if being lifted on a hydraulic platform. The teenager suddenly stopped moving forward. What the? Another set of breasts hung beneath the first, and another under them. The woman's engorged chest looked like a sow that had recently given birth, with gray nipples descending the length of her torso. The teenager pointed a finger. "You freaky bitch! Stay the fuck—" Something else emerged out of the Alfa Romeo. Long, thick, hairy. "Oh shit," Dale said. One by one, 8 hair-covered legs, each the girth of an adult python, uncoiled from the car's interior. They stretched out as if waking from a long hibernation, then began to plank their arachnid feet on the dirt. The creature lifted itself out of the car, looking like something out of Greek mythology gone haywire. From the waist up, it resembled a human female, but everything else was arachnid. With multiple leg joints and thick brushes of hair, it scurried away from the Alfa Romeo, its dark eyes at least 8 feet above the ground, peering at the teenager. The boy who had been so animated only a minute ago seemed frozen in place, paralyzed in the creature's Medusa-like gaze. He didn't attempt to run, even when it scurried toward him. Its front legs bucked up, enveloping the boy. He was lifted off the ground, and 4 hairy legs began to spin his body. Silk shot out of the ass end of the creature, and within a few seconds, the boy was mummified, cocooned, for her children's consumption. The 8-legged monster then began to move toward the mine, its wrapped-up prize dragging behind. Dale hunkered down as much as his large body would allow, gripping the stock and barrel of the shotgun so tight his knuckles were pearl white. He knew the shotgun's kill range was less than 10 feet, but he wasn't looking forward to getting that close. God damn it, Earl, where the hell are you? All 8 legs came to a stop at the mouth of the mine. Its human half started to lean forward, and for a second, Dale thought she was just crouching to fit through the entrance. But he was wrong. The creature bent all the way forward, its human hand picking up something off the ground. It was Dale's rope. Her head and torso came back up, the rope gripped in both hands. Her black eyes seemed to follow the length of the rope tethered to Dale's truck. Well, shit. Dale readied the shotgun. So much for a surprise attack. Anger, vile and terrifying, consumed the creature's face. It started moving toward the truck, its human hands coiled into fists. After only a few yards, it stopped, the anger melting away to what Dale thought was concern, as if she just realized the rope also descended into her burrow, her nest. She sniffed at the air, like a wolf catching the scent of blood on a wounded animal. She cut loose her latest prize, lowered her head, and scurried down into the mine. The teenager's wrapped-up body rolled down a slope and out of sight. Dale waited a few seconds for the hair on the back of his neck to relax, then stood up, letting out a long breath he wasn't even aware he'd been holding. He stepped from behind the pile of rocks and made for his cab, already picturing himself sitting safely within its confines. He'd much rather shoot down at the thing from inside his truck, or better yet, catch the beast in a crossfire from high up with Earl and his .38 on one side, and him on the... A blood-curdling scream that was only part human exploded from the mine. Dale whirled around, shotgun at his hip as the anguished cries echoed behind him. "Damn it, Earl, I could use some help here." "Okay, nothing to panic about," Dale told himself. "The bitch didn't see me up here, so she probably thinks I'm still in the hole somewhere. Just keep quiet," and a loud chirping noise shattered Dale's thought. He spun around looking for the source, which seemed to be behind him. After spinning a half circle, the chirping was behind him again. He did another fast 180, scanning the entrance of the mine for a few tense seconds. Then, he finally realized what it was. Goddamn phone. He pulled the cell phone from his back pocket, desperately trying to make it be quiet. He flipped it open and after pressing several buttons, finally hit the green one. The screen lit up. The chirping stopped. He was about to whisper something into the phone when he realized that whispering was no longer necessary. Eyeshine glinted deep within the gullet of the mine, and it was moving toward him.
"Dale, you there?"
Earl's voice squeaked out of the tiny speaker. Dale didn't answer, just took several steps back, shotgun leveled at the mine's entrance in one hand, cell phone in the other.
"Hey, good buddy. I'm at your back door,"
Earl said.
"Find anything?"
Dale held the phone in front of his face and said, "A bug. A big fucking bug." He threw the phone into the mine and saw it bounce off the beast's chest. He gripped the barrel of the shotgun, anchoring the stock on his hip, just as the 8-legged monstrosity exited her lair. Pausing as it emerged, its back legs still lost in the mine's entrance, the beast seemed to know what Dale held in his hands, and it stood still, hissing, contemplating. She tilted her head, lowered her chin, and glared deep into Dale's eyes. The creature cast no visible shadow in the thin moonlight, but Dale felt himself being enveloped by it anyway, cold and scurrying up his spine. They stood motionless, like two gunfighters waiting for that undeniable moment demanding split-second reactions. "My God, you're 500 pounds ugly," Dale said. The creature slowly began to circle and hissed in a low, guttural tone, sounding not unlike his ex-wife. "Geez, I want to hear a woman hiss me all night long. I'll go visit my boy." Dale rotated with her, keeping the shotgun aimed at her chest. He judged her to be about 15 feet away, just a bit too far to do terminal damage, but he wasn't about to take a step forward. As it turned out, he didn't have to. "What you waiting on, Christmas? Let's dance, bitch." The 8-legged beast lowered her head like a bull, thrust her human hands forward, and charged, howling like hellspawn. Dale counted to 2, held his breath, then let go with both barrels. The explosions echoed down the mine as the beast pitched back, hands clasping her chest. When her hands fell, Dale could see one of her upper breasts was gone, and an arm hung by cartilage and sinew. Blood splattered her torso, flowing down onto hairy legs. She thrust a raised hand forward, clawing at the air, looking more enraged than ever. Dale took quick steps backward, pulling 2 more rounds from his pocket. He had to lower his eyes for a split second as he popped the shells into the chamber. When he brought them back up, a hairy leg struck him in the jaw. He felt his feet leave the ground and heard his gun go off. He sailed several yards through the air and then hit something hard. What he'd landed on bent inward under his weight, and it took a hazy second to realize he wasn't on the ground. He had landed on the hood of the Alfa Romeo. The she-bitch scurried toward him, rising up on her back legs, teeth bared. Dale pointed the shotgun, not really aiming, and pulled the trigger. The soft sound of the hammers falling atop the empty chambers was, at that moment, the worst sound in the world. "Oh shit." Dale sat up, digging into his pocket for more shells. He saw her hand reaching toward him, and he swatted at it with the stock of the gun. She blocked his blow, knocking the shotgun from his grasp. She reached down and clasped Dale around the neck, lifting his ass off the hood. She pulled his face to hers, opening her mouth. For a second, Dale thought she intended to sink her teeth right into the bridge of his nose. He could taste her breath, foul, rank with rot. Then something seemed to catch her attention. Her eyes moved past Dale, and he felt her grip loosen. He wasted no time. He brought both fists down on her wounded arm. The creature howled, and Dale fell from her grasp, landing back on the hood with a thud. Pain rocketed through the back of his head as a familiar sound echoed in the night, rumbling, growing close. Dale rolled off the hood just as Earl's 18-wheeler plowed into the Alfa Romeo like a freight train, horn blaring. The crash was deafening. Sparks flew as big as muzzle flashes. Metal-tearing screeches exploded into the night. Dale kept rolling in the dirt as Earl's trailer rushed by. He got a quick glance at the arachnid bitch raising her human hands in a vain attempt to slow down 15 tons of speeding metal. With the Alfa Romeo as a hood ornament, Earl's trunk bulldozed into the creature, its hairy legs leaving the ground. The 18-wheeler began to slide as the brakes were applied, but it didn't stop before smashing into a rocky, man-made hill, piled high with unwanted material excavated from the Hope mine. The creature was pinned between the rocky hill and the crumpled frame of the Alfa Romeo. Earl's truck seemed to stand guard over the scene, pushing forward enough to keep the arachnid in her place, crushed in a tangle of broken black legs and twisted metal. Dale popped himself up into his sitting position as Earl stepped out of the cab. He had never been so happy to see his friend.
Took you long enough? You cruised the granny lane all the way here, did you?
Earl walked over to Dale, hand extended.
You never could appreciate a proper entrance.
Dale grabbed his friend's hand and allowed himself to be pulled up. Thanks, old man. Earl stood a few inches taller than Dale, and many pounds heavier.
Well, I was in the neighborhood.
Dale smiled and walked over to get his shotgun.
Can I assume breakfast is on you?
Earl said. Yeah. Dale gathered up his weapon. And not the usual cheap Denny's Grand Slam, neither. A real fine and proper breakfast. Dale walked back, slapped an arm around Earl's shoulder. I'd take you to the Russian tea room about now if I could. Earl tugged on his black Harley-Davidson t-shirt.
Well, we're a bit underdressed.
They both stared for a few silent moments at the carnage at the far side of Earl's front bumper. The creature squirmed in front of them. Two of its long legs still moved just outside the crushing pressure of Earl's truck. Its female head lay over the top of the rocky hill, blood drooling down the sides of her mouth. Earl stepped forward, taking a hard look.
Christ, Dale, you sure do have a knack for finding the meanest, ugliest women.
Well, it's a gift.
Well, you ought to think serious about giving it back.
Earl scratched his head.
What the hell's that?
Dale had heard of these creatures. Mostly just whispers in the night, really. I think they're called Homo arachnus. Part people, part bug. Were spiders, if you want. I think the last one on record died off in the 50s, along with them giant desert ants. Military took them out. Well, at least that's the rumor.
Well, that rumor is in need of a status update.
Earl looked over at the mine entrance.
Oh, anyone alive down there?
Nothing on two legs. Dale pointed down the slope. There's a kid down there in a silk wrapper. Probably just napping. Looks like spider bitch like to stun her prey.
I'll go take a look,
Earl said, then pointed over at the crushed beast.
Why don't you go and say goodnight to Gracie?
Dale nodded and strolled toward the rocky hill. He pulled 2 shells from his pocket and loaded the shotgun. Closing the chamber, he climbed up and around the uppermost part of the hill, where the creature's head lay. Its black hair spilled out onto the dirt like crude oil, and Dale placed a boot on a few healthy strands, inches from her scalp. She tried to raise her head up, but Dale's boot held it down by its midnight-colored locks. She looked at him and hissed, blood spotting his jeans. In these final moments, Dale could never despise these things. Not much, anyway. It was just an unnatural thing, doing what unnatural things were made to do. But now, it was time for Dale to do what Dale was made to do. He leaned over, placed both barrels up against her forehead. "Say goodnight, Gracie." He pulled the trigger.
Aggie circled the address and folded up the paper. It had taken almost 7 years for the Pittsburgh Observer to return listing real estate in their Saturday edition. Luckily, with the recession having decreased enough to beckon a mini housing boom back to the Pittsburgh area, the paper reintroduced its housing section. Aggie knew not all landlords, especially older ones, advertised online. She thought this to be especially true to those who lived in older sections of Shadyside, Squirrel Hill, and Oakland, near so many of Pittsburgh's universities. The houses were big, bedrooms large, and many owners advertised rooms to let on telephone posts and college bulletin boards. Some are listed only in the paper. Sidling over to the other side of a metal bench painted dark green and chipping, she tapped the number. A Port Authority transit bus roared by as an ambulance bleated its way along Forbes Avenue. She held the phone close to one ear and covered the other with her hand. "Hi. Hello? I'm calling about the advertisement for a room. An apartment in your house?" She turned back toward the bustling street, the bus now down the hill, and the ambulance siren a distant refrain.
Yes?
An older man's voice. "I would like to arrange a time to see it. I hope it's still available. I'm pretty desperate. I have to give up on my lease in the next 2 weeks. Your price is good, and your location is right near a bus stop for my school. Your house is on..."
Seville Alley, near Whiteman. My entrance is on Whiteman, but come in through the back from the alley. I rarely use the front 'cause I've got nosy neighbors. Anyway, all the houses are red brick, but you have my address, and I have a green wooden door.
Aggie asked for details about rent, utilities, and where to get groceries. She told him her situation and her need to move fast.
What time will you visit?
He had a gruff, low voice like her grandfather's, minus the Pittsburgh accent. She pictured him in khakis and a flannel shirt, on a fireplace recliner watching golf, a welcoming, grandfatherly twinkle in his eyes. A dog barked in the background. Nice. Tomorrow evening, around 6:30. Will that work?
How about 7? The other tenants will have settled in by then.
He cleared his throat. Thank you. Oh, by the way, my name is Aggie Krieg.
Nice to meet you, Aggie. I'm Bill. See you tomorrow.
She closed her cell, feeling relieved, less anxious. If this worked out, she'd have enough time to pack her few belongings and move in by the time the fall semester started. In her junior year at Pitt, she had expected to room with her friend Diane in the 2-bedroom cramped apartment they shared on Craig Street near Pitt. Diane had mentioned that she and Todd, short for Thaddeus, thought about getting their own place. But with summer near an end and no discussion or visits to check out new homes, Todd's monosyllabic vocabulary and nightly beer-ponging with friends in their, Aggie and Diane's, crowded living room finally smacked Diane into seeing the lumbering idiot that Todd was. Instead, the happy couple dropped the news that they had signed a lease for a Shadyside apartment, like a slaughtered pig before Aggie's feet. Just as Todd retrieved the oft-used and dented red Solo cups from atop the refrigerator to set up for beer pong. No, "Sorry this happened so fast," or "Sorry, we fucked you over with only a week to find a roommate," or "We know you can't afford it on your own, but maybe someone else is desperate too, and needs to find a place fast. She didn't have time to be mad at Diane. Someday she'd give her friend an earful for being so insensitive. Todd, she couldn't believe otherwise, would be long gone. Aggie got off the PennDOT bus on Murray Avenue, near the Giant Eagle supermarket. She looked in the window of the kosher deli, walked past Szechuan Gourmet and Pamela's Diner, and crossed Forbes Avenue. Squirrel Hill on Thursday night was bustling with cars, bicyclists, and pedestrians. When she crossed Forbes Avenue, shops and banks disappeared, and in their place, tall, stately homes snuggled together like roosting birds. She turned left onto Aylesboro and walked past old 3- and 4-story brick homes framed in fencing and kept private with stained glass windows and draping foliage. She reached Whiteman, and sure enough, 6 houses down, Seville Alley bisected the block, exposing the backsides of those very houses she'd passed. Aggie checked her phone. If she got the apartment and needed to stop at the supermarket before going home after classes, she'd have an 8 to 10 minute walk to Bill's. Perfect. The cobblestones rippled in waves as they streamed up the alley to the cross street. Rusted iron grills and wooden fencing separated houses and makeshift storage areas. Nestled along the bulging roots of elm were small blue bags piled like a pyramid, a testimony to the humming flies and the pervasive smell of dog poop that overlaid the soft rot of compost and grass clippings along the curb. Up ahead, she saw a green wooden door under a porch. The lawn was cut. Long dead flowers drooped from plastic pots. Grillwork over the windows gave Aggie a sense of safety already. Bill was no fool. He knew thieves could break a window. Aggie knocked on the door. She waited, a good feeling inside her. She knocked again. The house was huge, and the only light she could see was in a second-floor window. Using her cell phone, she called Bill. It rang 3 times, then stopped. No message. No forwarding ability. When she'd talked to Bill the day before, he'd answered right away. Aggie tried again. Same thing. She paused, looking around. A car screeched somewhere in the distance. The air sat still, suspended in the alley as a dog barked inside the house. She cut around the narrow strip of lawn between Bill's house and his neighbor's, stepping over low-lying shrubs and gnomes whose eyes twinkled at the sky with puffed cheeks and malicious grins. She climbed the stone steps and crossed over to the door. Softly, she knocked on the front door, worried a noisy neighbor or resting tenant might hear. Maybe Bill had trouble hearing and just didn't know it. He sounded old enough. She thought back to her grandfather, who'd finally gotten a hearing aid after Aggie's parents spent days pantomiming their words in frantic gesticulations. Bill had written in the ad that one of his tenants had left, meaning there were others. Maybe someone else would be awake and hear her. A light flicked on from inside, lighting the outside. Thank God. She heard movement, a thud, and hurried thumps. The door opened, and a furry golden retriever pushed its way to the front, where it rubbed its snout against the glass before going up on its hind legs and pawing the door.
Welcome, young lady. You must be Aggie. And this
He pulled on the dog's collar and ordered her to sit.
is Molly Dog. My Molly Dog, aren't you?
The dog panted by his owner's leg and sat still. Aggie took in the spaciousness of the house and Bill's jolly face. He resembled someone she'd seen on TV, but she couldn't place the name. A zip-up maroon cardigan lay over worn khakis and a collared shirt. Tiny plods of plucked thread littered the sweater, along with dog hair. His grin stretched across a receding jawline, and he stared at her behind dark-rimmed reading glasses. When he beckoned her into the living room, she saw a hearing aid plugging his left ear. "It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood," popped into her head. They talked for an hour about college, his life, and Molly Dog.
I wish I could show you the room you'll have. Jonathan won't move out until next week, and the other occupants aren't here for you to meet. It's an eclectic group of people, you see, with different jobs and schedules. But you will like them all.
Bill jutted forward from the couch, where Molly Dog had curled beside him, her head now resting on her paws.
You're not allergic to cats, are you?
Eyes wide, his earnest face mimicked the severe tone of his question. "No, my roommate and I, have a cat in our place, but it's hers. Jazzy, we call him. She'll take him with her when she moves, so I'll be catless soon, but I like them." "Why?" Bill smiled and sighed appreciatively.
Dana, on the 3rd floor across from you, number 8, has 2 cats, Mungo and Jerry. She likes musicals. They are house cats, get along with Molly Dog, but I had a guy who couldn't live with cats. Allergic. I had to use an EpiPen once. I just wanted to warn you.
Aggie just knew. She belonged here. Bill slapped his thighs and stood up.
Time to show you a room. Not yours, but just like the one you'll have. At least you'll know what to expect.
Aggie rose from the couch and followed Bill, past a music room with a piano and cello that glistened under a giant chandelier. His navy blue sneakers made no sound on the polished hardwood floors as they reached a long carpeted stairway. Her heart fluttered. She didn't know Bill, didn't know the house. For God's sake, she hadn't even asked him his last name. Aggie hesitated. On an end table to the right of the stairs, a 12 by 15 framed photograph of Bill and his wife showed a beaming Bill and Allison on their marriage day. In her talk with Bill, she learned Allison had been the love of his life. She'd died painfully and cruelly months before. Per Bill, she'd been cremated. The big old house just screamed for people and voices other than those within his memory. So Bill had begun to rent out the spacious rooms and renovate others into mini apartments. The stairs ended in a shadowed landing. Molly Dog leaped ahead of her onto the stairs and barked. Bill turned on a hallway light.
After you, my dear.
He placed a fatherly pat on her arm as she took the first step. Moving day came fast, and Aggie's meager belongings fit nicely into a few boxes and bags piled into Diane's car. Saturday in Squirrel Hill bustled with pedestrians, Orthodox Jews going to temple, Chinese students walking in groups, runners and dog walkers vying for space along the sidewalks, cars honking as traffic stopped or someone trying to parallel park on Murray. Diane drove her lime green Kia through the mess and pulled into the sun-spotted alley behind Bill's house. "Hey, wouldn't it have been easier to park in front and go in that way?" Diane clutched a brown cardboard UPS box filled with books as she and Aggie went up the back steps. "Probably, but he says the neighbors are nosy, and one lady is always asking questions about his tenants. And he thinks what his boarders do for a living and their schedules is no one's business. He said coming in from the alley mutes the gossip." Bill had left a note on the door.
Make yourself at home. The key is in the foyer under your welcoming flowers. Please be quiet. Others might be sleeping. I will be back later today. Bill.
Yellow, red, and white flowers stood at attention, tied with twine. Aggie picked them up and sniffed them. Diane grunted under the weight of her box. A green welcome mat stretched along the kitchen floor. Aggie and Diane walked across the wide plank floor, polished and glistening in an immaculate kitchen twice the size of their former living room. Past the pantry, they entered the first-floor foyer. A dining room, music room, and library occupied the other side of the foyer. On their side, the kitchen adjoined the living room, offering a separate sitting area enclosed by long windows for intimate conversation. Sunlight beamed through the long windows.
This place is gorgeous.
Wow, you lucked out, Ag. Diane whispered as she looked around at the polished wooden beams and scrolled molding.
Sure keeps it clean for a landlord.
I know. No Todd. No stale smell of beer on his person whenever he stayed over, or dented solo cups that had fallen off the table and rolled in the dust. Wisps of hair fell from Aggie's ponytail as she carefully, quietly, lugged her box up the stairs, taking care not to startle any late sleepers. She stopped halfway up to the second landing to catch her breath.
Bill reminds me of someone on TV, but it's Molly Dog you have to see. She is so sweet. I can't wait to ask Bill if he'll let me take her for a walk.
All this whispered to Diane as Aggie glanced outside at the alley. A malodorous ripple of dog poop and garbage breezed through the open screen. She winced and continued past the second floor to the third. A steeple-shaped ceiling ran the length of the third floor, divided into 3 apartments on each side.
This is beautiful. Which apartment is yours?
Diane's soft, drawn voice forced a slow swirl of dust motes in the air.
Here's my key. There's my apartment.
Aggie beamed, before placing the skeleton key into door number 7. Aggie organized her belongings in a little over an hour. An ornately brocaded couch sat in one corner of her living room, a Persian rug and armchairs in front, and a low coffee table in between. A colossal window stared down from the kitchen onto the rooftop of a neighbor's house. In the bathroom, a clawfoot tub grasped old blue tiles with a wraparound shower curtain. Except for a closet-sized windowless bedroom, Aggie savored the beauty of her apartment in the classy old neighborhood of Squirrel Hill. Not to mention finding a kindly, grandfatherly owner with a great dog. Diane bid her goodbye, kiss, kiss, gave her a housewarming cactus from the dollar store, and rushed back to rouse Todd from a beer-induced hangover. Aggie walked to the Giant Eagle and picked up instant mac and cheese and lunch items, enough that she could carry back to Bill's without struggle. Maybe when she got back, some of the tenants would be up and about. She stopped at Brugger's Bagels and an Asian store selling incense to promote good karma. Clouds swirled around a blue sky in a friendly wind that scuttled leaves and seeds along the sidewalks. Aggie thought of silver linings and had to agree. Diane and Todd's rotten timing had been a blessing for her. It was a beautiful day in the neighborhood. She entered the house and smelled coffee. In the kitchen, leftover scrambled eggs sat pouting and cold in a cast-iron skillet, a Mr. Coffee on and half full. Something smelled like baked goods right from the oven. Aggie hurried to the stairs and peeked into the living room, half expecting to see one of the tenants. Music, something jazzy, drifted down from upstairs. A banana bread wrapped in cellophane with a ribbon and note sat on the floor outside of her apartment. Aggie placed her bags on the floor and opened the letter. Welcome, neighbor. Leave for vacation today, but I will catch up with you as soon as I return. You'll love the house and Bill. See you soon. Dana. Aggie's eyes teared up. She turned the key and hipped it open, moving fast to her kitchen table, where she let go of her bags before going back for the banana bread. Outside her kitchen window, dry leaves cluttered the gutters and pigeons clustered in a group near the chimney. Their coos muted through the glass, their feathers shiny, then dull, as clouds played in the sunlight. Aggie looked for a latch to open the window, but the panels were cocked shut. She made a mental note to ask Bill if she could remove the hardened paste and open the window for fresh air. Aggie figured the only trespasser might be a pigeon come to roost or steal leftover crumbs, with no fire escape to climb up to the 3rd floor. Aggie walked downstairs and followed the smell of coffee to the kitchen. Bill stood at the sink, washing dishes and humming. Molly Dog lay at his feet, her blonde face snuggled between furry paws.
Excuse the mess in here. I spent some time with Eric upstairs, number 6. I doubt you two have met. He left for Frisco for the next 2 weeks, so you won't meet him for a while. Security consultant, always on the move.
Bill turned and grinned, soapy hands holding a soapy dish.
Coffee?
Yes, please. Aggie bent down to ruffle the dog's ears. I haven't met the other tenants, but Dana left me a greeting and some bread. So nice of her. She said she's going on vacation?
Well, sort of. Her mom is sick, and she is going to help her out. Somewhere near the Poconos.
Bill poured Aggie's coffee and scooted a blue enamel canister of sugar along the counter. He offered half and half to her. I guess I'll meet her when she gets back. Who's feeding her cats? Aggie stirred her coffee. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, reflecting off a toaster gleaming like new, and a crowded key ring hanging above it on a hook. Blue jays squawked outside, and a mourning dove cooed from somewhere nearby.
Cats?
Bill handed her a napkin. He was wearing the same cardigan and khakis he'd worn when she'd interviewed with him. He smiled over his coffee, big sparkling eyes behind his glasses. Yes. When we first met, you mentioned if I was allergic to cats because the lady on the 3rd floor with me has cats? Aggie inwardly smiled. Bill might not only be hard of hearing, but he might also be confusing stories in his old age. Or he was maybe forgetting.
Yes, oh yes, Aggie.
He shook his head and chuckled, finally connecting the dots.
Glad you reminded me.
The gesture was akin to the confusion her own grandfather experienced, and Bill's response reinforced a warm familiarity as if she were a little girl and back home. Bill grabbed a rag and wiped away sugar grains and toast crumbs. I'll be meeting friends out tonight. No problem with me coming home late, I hope.
No problem. Just be quiet. Come in through the alley, of course, and lock the door behind.
He grinned and patted her shoulder. Oh, hey, Bill. Is it possible for me to open my window? I noticed it's sealed with caulk or something like that. Either way, I can't open it. She finished her coffee and Bill reached for her mug. He cocked his head and looked at her. That wide grin returned.
Of course. Do you mind if I get to it later in the week when you're in classes?
His chin disappeared, and he stared at Aggie. Funny little man. Of course, Aggie said. She met friends at Maneo's Pizza for dinner before going down to Shadyside, where she drank 3 IPAs with a tinge of peach flavoring and 2 shots of bourbon at Cappy's Cafe, beer at Diane and Todd's place, and caught a late bus to Squirrel Hill. Each time the PennDOT bus swirled around a corner, booze gurgled inside her, threatening to gurgle right up and out. Streetlights diffused, fuzzy. A warm drizzle soaked the streets, and pedestrians clustered along the sidewalks, hoods and umbrellas up. She held tight to the door rail as she got off the bus, trying hard to walk straight and be aware. Bodies moved toward her, past her, around her, and she hoped she didn't smell of alcohol. Crossing Forbes, neon lights and eateries disappeared, and she entered the dark stretches of Murray Avenue. A gentle mist was floating ghost-like from the hot pavement, shrouding the scant glow of streetlights. Try as she might, she walked a crooked line back to Bill's place. In through the alley door, she tiptoed on the kitchen floor. A light burned in the music room. If Bill or a tenant were up late, they'd see her drunk. Step by uneasy step, she crept through the foyer into the stairway and up to the second floor. She took out her key and wobbled down the corridor before registering the numbers. She and Dana were 7 and 8 on the third floor. A saxophone played low from room 6. She felt slog-headed, woozy, as she backtracked and climbed the stairs. A wall sconce lent a soft, warm glow along the corridor. Outside her door, she rummaged through her purse and found her keys. She placed the key in her door when a thud sounded across the hall. Then a sound of breaking glass and pinging along the floor. She jumped and felt her heart thump. She paused, looked around her, and then stepped to Dana's door. She placed her ear next to the wood. Quiet. Aggie rubbed her eyes and cursed her wraith-like floating thoughts. She darted back to her apartment. Holding onto the counter with one hand, she poured a large plastic glass of water and drank. If Dana was in the Poconos, what caused the crash in her apartment? Maybe she should wake Bill. But she didn't know where he slept. She looked at her phone. Almost 2 a.m. No, she wouldn't call him this late, or let him see her glassy-eyed and drunk on her first night at his place. She considered asking the music player on the second floor for help, but he, or she, might tell Bill he'd just rented to a drunken college student. Aggie struggled to think clearly. Dana's apartment was too high in the house, just like hers, for a burglar to be crashing in. Maybe a picture fell, or a window or light broke. Shit. What if one of the cats caused the crash? Or the crash caused injury or death to one of the cats? Her mind reeled. Maybe instead of waking the whole damn household, she should check things out for herself. A neighborly gesture to pay back Dana for the banana bread. Only she needed a key. Aggie drank more water before heading downstairs. The saxophone still played from room 6 on the second floor. She glanced down the corridor. Drizzle fell like silent teardrops on a window at its furthest reach. Damn, if she weren't so wasted, she'd go to Saxophone Man's apartment and ask for help. Eric, that was his name. Mr. Casanova. She continued to the first floor foyer, where she skirted the dining room and peeked into the music room. The piano's silhouette sat dark, a low thrumming of rain, the only sound coming from the room. Molly Dog barked from somewhere below her as Aggie rushed into the kitchen. A dull yellow light above the kitchen sink came on when she hit the light switch. The key ring was still hanging above the toaster, and Aggie hoped they were Bill's copies to the apartments. She lifted the ring and fisted them in her hand to prevent jingling. A rectangular corkboard with tin pockets numbered 1 through 8 for mail hung on the side of the refrigerator, unnoticed by her that morning. She looked at her pocket, and it was empty. She took 3 steps out of the kitchen and came to a dead stop. A deep fluttering bloomed inside her chest as she slowly walked back to the refrigerator. Of 8 mail pockets, hers was the only one with a name. She paused and tried to get a grip on thoughts moving too fast through her head. Another soft bark came from downstairs. No way she wanted Bill to find her sneaking around with his set of keys, drunk in the middle of the night. She rushed back to the foyer and up the stairs. Outside Dana's apartment, she slowly breathed and tried one key, then another. The third lock slid in easily and turned with a click. There was no sound from Molly Dog. She nudged the door open, a wedge of light falling on the apartment floor. Across the far side of the room, 2 tall, straight-backed chairs stood like guards at either end of a long, brocaded couch. A small table and lamp sat to her left. Unease settled over her like fine dust. Opening the door wider, she stepped inside, the bare wood floor groaning under her weight. She turned on the light.
"Here, kitty, kitty," she whispered.
The living room and dining room lay in quiet repose, empty and uncluttered. Dust bunnies dotted the floor in place of rugs or carpet, and a fog born of stale air and old heating squeezed the room. Aggie crossed to the couch and peeked under it. Her footprints unsettled the fine pallor coating on the floor. In the kitchen, she turned on the light.
"Hey, kitties. Where are you?"
The kitchen sink sparkled, and the counter was bereft of appliances, dishes, soap, or rags. Bare floorboards showed no cat dishes, water bowls, or garbage can. The kitchen table and chairs sat upright, and the cupboards closed. Aggie figured that Dana must have confined the cats elsewhere. She headed to the living room, where a closed door suggested a bathroom or bedroom. Aggie heard the hum of rain and felt a subtle current of air when she opened the door. A long window clung to a hinge like a desperate climber. A pane had broken and laid scattered on the floor, but no rain was coming in. She feared a hurt cat and anxiously peered under the bed and behind a wide upholstered rocking recliner. A small opening between the louvered doors of Dana's closet gave Aggie hope the cats had settled inside. She pushed open the closet, looking right and left. No cats. No. Her insides were coiled. Nothing. No shoes, clothes, boxes. Empty. A warm wind scuttled leaves along the roof and the quieting drizzle outside the room. Inside, that same wind shuffled dust bunnies across the floor and into corners. A tingling prescience made her straighten her back and look into Dana's bathroom. She opened the medicine cabinet, pulled the shower curtain back, opened the vanity doors. Pristine cleanliness, and devoid of toiletries, towels, personal items of any sort. How could one explain the note from Dana and the banana bread outside her door? Bill had talked about Dana's cats. Aggie inhaled deeply, deliberately, trying to clear her head. She determinedly walked to the hallway out the bedroom and across Dana's living room floor. Something was amiss. Maybe Dana left without telling Bill she was gone for good. Maybe Dana cleaned the apartment to get her deposit back before telling Bill she wasn't returning from the Poconos. Maybe Bill had the cats with him, wherever he slept with Molly Dog. Perhaps she was confused about which apartment Dana lived in. Or maybe there was no Dana. In her own apartment, Aggie lifted the makeshift vase she'd made out of a plastic glass to hold Bill's welcoming flowers. Coreopsis, baby's breath, and cosmos radiated from a bunch of ferns. Bill's welcoming note lay under the vase. Aggie took out the handwritten note and reread it under the light of the sink. Bill's writing would have made Sister B, the nun who taught cursive at Aggie's Catholic elementary school, glow with pleasure at his gentle, almost feminine script. Aggie imagined the red A at the top, Bill's paper pinned to the bulletin board for everyone to see. Aggie lay it face up on the counter. The remaining banana bread sat wrapped in its cellophane near her sink. She bent down to her recycling can and fingered its contents, looking for Dana's note. The word insidious scrabbled like crabs across her thoughts. She scrounged through the boxes she lugged in earlier that day when she and Diane had unloaded her belongings. Aggie's mouth felt dry, acidic, and she paused to drink more water. The water cleared her mouth, but gurgled in her stomach. She searched the garbage can before rifling through her raincoat pockets and jeans. The note was gone. She thumbed through her purse and found it, wadded into a ball with a piece of chewed bazooka bubblegum she'd dumped when her first bourbon arrived. She'd shown the note to Teddy when he'd shocked her by mumbling if she liked living in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, which garnered laughs from all around. Now, under the kitchen light, Aggie pried the sticky gum away from Dana's note and stretched out the crinkled, spit-stained paper. She placed it next to Bill's welcoming letter. She hadn't noticed. But why would Bill risk her making the connection? Maybe he was crazy. Or maybe he was a sick man confused by dementia. A tender shot of compassion wrested its way up and into her being. His wife was gone. He'd been lonely for months, needing people around him. He had tenants, so obviously, what? She'd heard footsteps and music on the other floor. Bill said Eric was a Casanova and was going away for 2 weeks. People worked different hours, and hell, she'd only lived there 1 day. It was entirely possible that she'd just missed the others with the comings and goings of a busy Saturday. Maybe she'd wait until the morning and tell Bill about Dana's broken window and empty apartment, and ask about Mungo and Jerry. Aggie's imagination ran haywire, and she wanted to wring Diane's neck and stuff a fucking ping-pong ball down Todd's throat for putting her in this situation. She still had Bill's keys. She had to return them to the hook downstairs before morning. She also had to clear her head. Too many what-ifs and maybes, swirling like a cyclone in her alcohol-addled brain. Aggie took a shower, where the hot water eased her mind and relaxed her body. She thought of calling Diane. Fuck Todd, who'd likely snore through the call anyway. Out of the shower and still tipsy, she put on her PJs, robe, and Minnetonka moccasins. Leaves clumped at the eaves outside her window, but the rain had stopped. A sliver of moonlight limed the clouds. She drank one more glass of water and felt bloated. Something echoed in her mind. An aha moment caught her as she stood looking out her kitchen window. The saxophone, coming from the end of the second floor. Eric, the Casanova, went to Frisco, as Bill had mentioned. Number 6. But his music was playing. Bile rose in her throat, and she had a second where she leaned her head over the sink and expected to puke. Her mind imagined all sorts of scenarios from Friday Fright Night films in her youth. She breathed deeply, berating herself for such stupid thoughts. Keys in her robe pocket, she walked out her room and into the corridor. Tiptoeing down the steps, she brought forth the metal encouraged by her need to know and nourished by the disbelief of her inebriated thoughts. 1 step, 2 steps, now on the landing to the second floor. Music played from one of the rooms at the end. Aggie crept down the corridor. She placed her ear to room 5, then stepped across to room 6. A horn, exhaling long, low notes with other instruments. Aggie knocked. The music curled and repeated, and then low, throaty sounds from a woman took the stage. Aggie rapped fast and gently on the door, felt the pain in her knuckles. Irritation molded within her, Fucking someone had to be home, playing this music, unless Eric had forgotten to turn it off. She fingered the keys and placed one in the lock. If someone burst open the door demanding to know what she was doing, she'd tell them about Dana's apartment and plead for her need for help. If no one was home, well, she needed to know. She'd never questioned Bill's story. She'd been too stupid to even ask for his last name. Maybe she should talk to those nosy neighbors Bill warned her of. The fifth key clicked as her bladder's balloon felt ready to burst. She so wanted to cry, to scream, to have someone with her. Opening the door provided a little light in the room. Looming like a giant was an armoire in the middle of the back wall, its steepled point almost touching the ceiling. A recliner rested next to a coffee table, with the radio turned on. Aggie moved across the bare floor and turned on a wall lamp. It was like her innards dropped an inch. She checked out the kitchen, bathroom, bedroom. Just like in Dana's room. Empty closets and bare cupboards. A fitting place for old Mother Hubbard. Not even a roll of toilet paper, after she'd scrunched her legs and just made it to Eric's toilet in time to pee. There was no Eric. No Casanova wooing women to his bed. Dust bunnies stuck like friends to her Minnetonkas. The muscles in her arms and legs felt like weights. A stark reality, clarity after a dream, hit her like a punch to the gut. She walked out of the room and tiptoed to the next room, number 5. She found its key and turned the lock. She turned on a light with each room down to number 1, looked for signs of a tenant, but found none. Bill lied to her, or suffered delusions. He'd lied in the advertisement, filled his house with non-existent people, and created stories about their lives. She was alone in the house with Bill. Aggie locked the last room. She heard a thumping sound and whimpering rising from below. Aggie ran up to her apartment floor and quickly, quietly, locked the door. Seconds later, Molly Dog padded along the floor outside her door, groaning and sniffing the bottom. More thumping, this time in Aggie's chest. She switched off the light above her kitchen sink and waited as the dog's shadows scurried to and fro under the door.
Hey, my girl, what's wrong?
Bill spoke low outside Aggie's door.
What's got you going, huh?
Molly Dog gave a plaintive cry and quieted.
Come on, girl, let's get you outside.
The dog thumped away. Aggie wanted to whimper, but the back of her throat wouldn't budge. If Bill were taking the dog outside to pee, he'd probably take her to the alley from the kitchen. Aggie threw on her jeans, t-shirt, and jacket. She grabbed her backpack and stuffed underwear, toiletries, and necessary items, purse and phone, into compartments. She'd call an Uber outside and sleep at Diane and Todd's for the night. Aggie watched the clock. It was close to 4 a.m., and she hadn't heard a sound since Bill had taken Molly Dog downstairs and out to pee. Over an hour ago. No longer a sot, she felt clearer-headed. Her stomach rumbled and threatened to empty, but she'd drunk so much water she couldn't handle another drop. She reached for the banana bread, but couldn't bring herself to eat it. After hoisting on her overloaded backpack, she grabbed her tote and opened the apartment door. Heart pounding loud in her ears and sweat pooling under her arms, she braced herself at the top of the stairs and waited. Not a vibration of wind against the windows, the patter of Molly Dog, or the shuffling of Bill's feet. Each step a nightmare. She tiptoed down to the second floor landing and paused. Panic, as sharp as the beating of her heart. A low voice sounded from the living room, where a dim light shone.
Molly Dog's been good, you know. She gets along well with the tenants and especially likes her new girl, Aggie. She's a nice young lady. And you know what? Dana made her banana bread for her arrival. Now there's someone who I want to keep. A keeper, you'd call her.
Bill chuckled. Aggie couldn't move. She wrestled with continuing to the kitchen, screaming and finding out who Bill was speaking to. Who was he talking to now, so early in the morning? Maybe she was wrong. Maybe there was someone else, another apartment in the basement she didn't know about. Her backpack lay heavy on her shoulders. She needed to leave now, right away.
I'll do some gardening today, take Molly Dog for a walk later. I wish you were here as always. I know, life goes on. That's what they all say. Sometimes, though, it seems to stop.
Bill chuckled.
Anyway, love of my life, I'll get you settled soon in your room in a pretty permanent place.
She had to know. Aggie crept to the living room, too afraid to look in, too confused not to. Bill rested in an armchair, legs folded, hands folded in his lap. He wore his zipped maroon cardigan and khaki trousers. His grin stretched wide along with his receding jowl as he stared intently at a see-through freezer bag filled with gray and white flecked dirt, or powder, that sat atop a folded giant eagle paper bag. Aggie later wondered if her heavy drinking caused the synapses in her brain to disconnect. Seconds or minutes, she didn't know how long, she had stood, taking every wrong turn, until click. The connection jolted her. Mrs. Bill? And what was Bill? Adrenaline squeezed her muscles. She flew out of the foyer and toward the kitchen, where a sleeping Molly Dog lay by the pantry. Aggie saw nothing as she rushed. Molly Dog wailed, her haunch trampled by Aggie's foot. The dog rose, a silhouette in the ambient light, and pushed against Aggie. Aggie threw Bill's keys on the counter as she legged the hound out of her way. Molly Dog barked twice.
Molly girl, what's wrong? You'll wake the tenants.
Bill's whisper grew louder as he neared the kitchen. Aggie pushed out the door and slammed it. Past the pyramid of blue dog poop bags and the gentle smell of rot, Aggie ran across the cobblestone, out the alley, and away from Bill.
Chilling tales for dark nights.